LoveLore Library. Chapter 547. Feng Yunyan realized that he had a few strands of white hair. He could only carefully pull them out in an attempt to make himself look younger. Today was the anniversary of her death. He took the pastries that she liked when she was alive and some incense, candles, and joss paper to worship her. Her mausoleum was built very luxuriously, leaving a place for him. 100 years later, he would be able to enter this place after death. Just thinking about it made him happy. Feng Yunyan looked at the tombstone. The snow fell on his hair, making it look like he had white hair. He burned the joss paper. Wei Wei, are you okay? Only the cold wind whistled past. He was used to it. You never told me that your favorability had reached 100. She only said 99. Feng Yunyan revealed a calm smile. But when you personally killed the old officials who were loyal to you and sent me to the throne, I knew that it was your 100. He still remembered that she said embarrassedly that if the favorability reached 100. He didn't want her anymore after he obtained the country. The truth was that she gave him the country and didn't want him anymore. There was a drought at the beginning of this year. There were so many memorials on my desk that I could be buried. He smiled. They were all scolding me. They said that I was a man who inherited the orthodoxy and that the heavens couldn't tolerate it. Even if I lightly taxed them and focused on irrigation and agriculture, making their lives better, I was still a monster. Whenever there was a natural disaster, it was his fault. She also knew that she had taken away the most powerful people back then. When she died, those ministers who had killed their way out of a mountain of swords and a sea of blood only obeyed her. When she died, his man ascended the throne. These people all rebelled. Even though she had cleared so many obstacles for him, he still had a hard time all these years. It was very hard. Feng Yunyan said softly as he burned the joss paper. It was as if this could reduce the pain in his heart. It could also make the incomparably heavy thoughts lighter. Wei Wei, guarding the country is really boring. How could I have ever thought of being the emperor? When he said this, he could no longer hold back his tears and they fell from his eyes. He hurriedly wiped it away. It's all my fault. Why are you always complaining? I should say something happy. Then, Feng Yunyan choked with sobs and forced a smile as he talked about how many good deeds he had done for the country and the people. He reluctantly stayed up until late at night before he was willing to return to the palace. The moment he returned to the palace, he saw his trusted servant hurrying over to report to him. More than a dozen ministers instigated tens of thousands of people to kneel at the entrance of the southern palace. They said that after your majesty ascended the throne as a man, natural disasters befell every year. They hoped that your majesty would abdicate. In the past few years, there had indeed been more natural disasters than before. When a man ascended the throne, his name was not legitimate, and all the women were suppressed. Feng Yunyan even began to promote male officials. This was simply touching the pie of the interest group. He had been fighting with this group for a long time. Feng Yunyan was silent for a while before coldly saying, "Jin understands. Let them kneel. I will deal with them tomorrow morning." The waiter retreated. Then, he sat alone in a chair and was in a daze for a long time. Someone was rebelling against him again. Wei Wei. He called softly. Yes. He suddenly looked up and saw Wei Wei by lazily leaning against the table. She was still smiling. Feng Yunyan was pleasantly surprised. With trembling hands, he rushed over to hug her. But in the next moment, he only hugged the void. Feng Yunyan was stunned. He looked at the empty room. There was no sign of her. Lovesickness had seeped into his bones. He chuckled, sad and wronged. Then, he slowly walked out of the door and into the imperial court. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. there. Chapter 548. He was the only one walking alone in the empty court. He looked up and saw the dragon throne. Suddenly, his eyes lit up with an unimaginable light. Cold and crazy. He ran up quickly and sat on the dragon throne. He put his hands on the armrest and gripped it tightly. She had used her life to exchange for this position. It was her gift to him. So what if everyone in the world rebelled? They all said that men could not ascend the throne. His Weiwei said that he could. Yes, he could. Feng Yunyan said in a hoarse voice, "This is what you gave me. No one can take it away." He only had the country she gave him left. He had nothing else. He had to protect the country she left behind. Feng Yunyan revealed a sad smile. "They all bully me, Weiwei." Those subjects all bullied him. Everyone wanted to pull him down from this position. He racked his brains and trembled with fear. Every single day was very difficult. But I can't die. If I die, the country you gave me will be taken away by others. Feng Yunyan sat alone and silently on the dragon throne, his tears falling silently. Without her to pamper him and protect him. He was so cheap that he was nothing. The sunlight entered the court and shone on his pale and haggard face. He suddenly looked up. The weakness in his eyes disappeared, only leaving behind a black killing intent. Feng Yunyan returned to his palace and put on the emperor's robes. Then, step by step, he walked into the court with an imposing manner. The ministers had already arrived. Some people felt that today's Feng Yunyan seemed a little different. Feng Yunyan slowly sat on the dragon throne. His posture was calm and elegant, and his face was expressionless. A minister said fiercely, "Your Majesty, there is a drought this year. The disaster is disastrous. Outside the south gate, there are already thousands of people kneeling to ask Your Majesty to abdicate. They hope that Your Majesty will reconsider." Feng Yunyan looked up. A light appeared in his dark eyes, cold and sharp. He curled his lips into a faint smile and swept his gaze over those who opposed him. "Then let's kill them all." From today onwards, he would no longer care about anyone, nor would he take half a step back for anyone. He would let everyone know that those who schemed against him and disobeyed him would all die a horrible death. Because the person who protected him was no longer there. All that was left was this vast expanse of lonely mountains and this empty palace to accompany him. He still had to live to protect her country. In the records of later generations, the first male emperor in history, the Feng clan, killed decisively during his reign. He used torture and tyrannical power. However, he was good at governing the country and was good at recruiting talents. During his rule, the people were safe and sound, and foreign enemies bowed their heads in submission, praising him both internally and externally. The Feng clan had spent their entire lives observing filial piety for the late emperor. They did not change the name of the country and adopted the women of the Bai clan, nurturing them with great care. In the 20th year of his reign, he died of illness on the way to the tomb of the previous emperor. After his death, he was buried with the previous emperor. The woman of the Bai family obeyed his wishes and ascended the throne. He had created a flourishing age. 20 years. He was like a lonely soul that had guarded the boundless land for 20 years. That kind of loneliness slowly seeped into his bones. It was enough to drive anyone crazy. When Yi Yushuan woke up, it was the first time he was afraid of a dream. And grievance, was it grievance? His heart was sour and astringent, and he couldn't describe what he was feeling. He just wanted to find her, then hug her and tell her that he was very uncomfortable. Weiwei Bai was a little puzzled. Her fingers gently touched his head. What's wrong with you? Who bullied you? Tell me, I'll help you bully them back, okay? This kind of Yi Yuxuan made her feel strange, but also a kind of soft helplessness. To read the full article at https://www.sashu.com to read on. Calm. Chapter 549. She couldn't even bear to speak harshly to him. Maybe it was because he really looked like he was wronged. Bai Changyan looked at Yi Yuxuan and then at his daughter. His lips trembled. Wei Wei, don't be fooled by him. He's the one who bullied you. It was really a case of the guilty party complaining first. A grown man crying and begging for sympathy. Did he think that he would forget his beastly behavior? Bai Weiwei was confused. She wasn't in a vegetative state, she was fishing for life points. Since when did Yi Yuxuan have the time to bully her? Could it be that he drew a turtle on her face as revenge when she was sleeping? Bai Changyan looked at his daughter's pure and innocent face and finally couldn't take it anymore. He felt that he had the obligation to teach her what the beasts in this world looked like. Bai Changyan pointed at Yi Yuxuan and said indignantly, "This beast, he kissed you. I saw it with my own eyes." Wei Wei Bai immediately explained, "You misunderstood, Dad. I kissed him." Bai Changyan didn't hear it. "He even took off your clothes with the intention to do something to you." Wei Wei Bai, "He didn't take it off, I did. I couldn't wait to seduce him." Bai Changyan's face turned red and he completely ignored her words. "He even hugged you and wanted to do something to you." Wei Wei Bai, "Then let's do it. We're already husband and wife. It's time to do it." Bai Changyan hugged his head in grief. "I actually gave my daughter to a man who's worse than a beast." Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't take it anymore and shouted, "I wanted to do it with him. He just had no choice." Bai Changyan finally reacted. Wait, what did his daughter just say? Yi Yuxuan also finally looked up. His expression was indifferent and his eyes were dark and misty. There was a hint of confusion. "I'm not worse than a beast." He heard old Father Bai's condemnation, but he didn't care. But there was a trace of uneasiness in his heart. Would she care? Wei Wei Bai looked at his exquisite face. His eyelashes were stained with tears, and there was a faint look of confusion on his face. Soft and handsome, he could make any woman let down their guard in an instant. At this moment, Wei Wei Bai was bursting with protectiveness. She raised her head and said to her father, "Father, it has always been your daughter who molested others. There is no reason for others to molest me. Look," she said through gritted teeth. Then, she reached out to hold his face and kissed him fiercely. Their tongues intertwined, moist and sweet. Both of them were shocked at the same time. Yi Yuxuan was in a daze as he allowed her to kiss him. Wei Wei Bai hugged his body forcefully and reached out to press down on his hair. The tip of her tongue slid across his lips, causing him to tremble. Yi Yuxuan couldn't help but kiss her back. He wanted to grab more of her breath. More, dispelling the fear and loneliness in his heart. The two of them kissed until it was hard for them to part. They kissed as if they were glued to each other. Old Father Bai staggered and Qin Qiu reached out to support him. "In-law, take care." Old Father Bai's tears flowed. "Daughter, what's wrong with you? Why did you suddenly grow up to molest men?" Qin Qiu sighed and took Old Father Bai to the side. Then, he pulled out a cigarette and handed it to him. The two men with complicated thoughts squatted on the ground and puffed out smoke. Qin Qiu was also uncomfortable. He rubbed his hands together and acted as a matchmaker. "Woo, Yi Yuxuan, this slag. Isn't this very good? He, a single dog, was abused so painfully and wrongly. Why didn't anyone comfort him? Suddenly, Bai Changyan reached out and patted him on the shoulder. The two of them looked at each other with a sad expression. My daughter has also grown up. Old father Bai sighed. Qin Qiu also sighed. Yes, my family's little Xian has also been enlightened. But why were they not happy at all? There. Chapter 550. 150 life points, full bar, stop fishing. The system took out the leftover Dignity Luxury Super VIP system spicy strips and ate one silently. Then it looked back and saw that the adulterous couple was still kissing each other like glue. Damn, don't they know how many people are in the corridor? Don't they have any shame? The life points were still surging and roaring. The system saw Yi Yuxuan and was totally unprepared. If it wasn't for Weiwei by being unable to accommodate more than 150 life points, it would have been able to make enough money. It could get enough in one go, so it didn't have to risk its life to cross planes to flirt with the big fool Yi Yuxuan. The system sighed. The warehouse is empty. If it continues like this, something will happen sooner or later. Even the side rewards were taken from the trash can in the corner of the warehouse to coax Weiwei by. It couldn't be helped. It didn't dare to take any of the side rewards given by the main system. If it took it, something would definitely happen. The system stopped its wild thoughts and quietly turned back. There was no kiss. It was relieved. Just as it was about to turn around, it heard Yi Yuxuan say softly, I had a dream. The system exploded and immediately drew a dialogue blocker with its fingers. It blocked Yi Yuxuan's words. Weiwei Bai was held tightly by Yi Yuxuan. He said lightly, that dream, what happened to that dream? Then Bai Weiwei heard Yi Yuxuan's lips move, but she couldn't hear anything, as if her ears couldn't accept it. She frowned. What's going on? She immediately knocked on the system. Tongzi, I think there's something wrong with my ears. I can't hear what Yi Yuxuan is saying. The system said calmly, you've transmigrated too much. Your hearing may be left in the plane space. It's okay, it will return to normal later. Weiwei Bai didn't doubt the system. She said to herself in confusion, why can't I hear when Yi Yuxuan is talking? The system was scared, worried that she would see something. Then, he switched the blocker to the modifier. Reality changed Yi Yuxuan's words. Weiwei Bai's ears and eyes suddenly became clear. Yi Yuxuan's indifferent and magnetic voice also sounded. In that dream, I transformed into Ultraman and fought small monsters. I fought a total of 33 small monsters. I even transformed into a flower fairy and kept spinning around. Weiwei Bai, this dream is too magical. And Yi Yuxuan actually said it very seriously. What the system heard was, in my dreams, you left me time and time again, never stopping. This time, you gave me your empire, it was melancholy. Sooner or later, it would not be able to hide it anymore. Unless Weiwei Bai had enough HP and didn't stay in the real world for too long to avoid Yi Yuxuan. After Yi Yuxuan finished speaking, he stared at her blankly, trying to see a trace of throbbing in her eyes. After Weiwei Bai finished listening to his dream of a flower fairy spinning around, she was speechless for a moment. He said softly, have you ever had this kind of dream? She had been sleeping and waking up, and the time of her dream matched with his. That was why he personally guarded her and didn't let the hospital do anything excessive to her body. He was worried that she was actually having the same dream as him. Weiwei Bai looked at his expectant eyes and couldn't help but cough lightly. Your dream is very colorful. I have never had this kind of dream. Who would dream of Ultraman fighting small monsters and a flower fairy spinning around? It's not like she didn't grow up. Yi Yuxuan fell silent and lowered his head. He was filled with the urge to tell her. It was all gone. She had never dreamed of him. If that was really their previous life, then he would be the only one to sink. Wei Wei Bai looked at him like a big dog that had been hit by a blow. He was so cute and cute. Chapter 551. She did not know why, but her heart was touched. There was a strange feeling of depression. She could not help but rub his hair and comforted him. You might have this dream in the future, so don't be sad. She thought that Yi Yuxuan was a robot with facial paralysis. She did not expect him to be a young man with a childish heart who did not grow up. This contrast instantly narrowed the distance between the two of them. Yes, she also liked Ultraman Flower Fairy SpongeBob SquarePants. They had the same interests and hobbies, so it was not difficult for them to get along. Yi Yuxuan's neatly combed short hair was ruffled by her. He did not move, but his lips were pursed. There was a clear light in his deep black eyes. Suddenly, he sighed softly and reached out to press her head against his shoulder. His fingers were placed on her delicate neck, without a trace of desire, and there was a trace of sadness in his dark eyes. It's good not to dream. In her dreams, she never had a good ending. In every life, she died because of those men. It was better not to dream like this. Wei Wei Bai straightened her neck, and her smile was a little stiff. She felt that Yi Yuxuan's mood was not right. Was he this passionate before? The system could not help but interrupt. Your excitement level is decreasing. If you continue to hug him, you will need to reverse feed your life points. Wei Wei Bai's breath caught, and she just remembered this. She only thought that Yi Yuxuan was her life. She forgot that he was also very good at taking lives. Wei Wei Bai's smile was a little stiff, and she slowly reached out her hand, as if she was afraid of disturbing him, and pushed him away inch by inch. Yi Yuxuan did not change his position, and she could not push him away no matter how hard she tried. The system said, your excitement level has stabilized, just a little more and you will start to reverse feed. Wei Wei Bai was a little anxious, and her voice could not help but soften. Yi Yuxuan. Without entering the strategy mode, her unfamiliar attitude towards him was revealed. She called his full name and surname. Yi Yuxuan paused for a moment before releasing her slightly. Wei Wei Bai tensed up. After all, life points were hard to come by. She had traveled through so many planes, and to be honest, she was tired. Every single one of the planes was laborious and exhausting. Every single time, they risked their lives to do the work. Only now did he manage to get a few months' worth of HP from Yi Yuxuan. She couldn't wait to carefully protect her life for the next few months. She couldn't bear to lose even a single day. But just a moment ago, she was still hugging and nibbling on him affectionately. Now, she turned hostile and kicked him away. Wasn't this telling others that she had ulterior motives? She could only persevere and soften her voice. You're hurting me. She unconsciously raised her last syllable with a hint of coquettishness. Yi Yuxuan's heart, which had started to waver again after being coaxed by her. He couldn't bear to let go of his fingers, but slowly, he finally let go of her. The ripples in his heart continued to expand. A feeling similar to dissatisfaction made him feel a little lost and silent. Towards unfamiliar feelings. No matter how solid his theoretical knowledge was, when he really faced those legendary joys, sorrows, doubts, and dissatisfaction, he was still at a loss. Everything was so fresh that he couldn't handle it. In the past, he was clearly the best at rationalizing anything into what he wanted. And then perfectly completing it. Only in front of Wei Wei Bai, he was like a newborn baby. It was as if a smile from her could make him hold her carefully and not bear to break even a little bit of her. Those painful experiences in his dreams that were separated by glass. It made him want to hold on to her even more tightly. Everything was like a prediction. Those men kept losing her. And would he lose her in the next second too? Chapter 552. Yi Yuxuan suddenly reached out and clasped her fingers tightly, ignoring her surprised expression. He was silent for a moment, but he didn't know how to organize his words to express his thoughts correctly. Wei Wei Bai's brain finally became active. Tongzi, don't you think Yi Yuxuan is really abnormal? The frightened system immediately denied it 3 times. No, he's very normal. Wei Wei Bai, why is it so suspicious? She looks like a big fool who's easy to fool. Oh, this was an extremely suspicious answer. The system immediately raised its guard. It racked its brains. Why don't you think about it? You grabbed someone when you woke up and gnawed on him. After that, you even took off your clothes and planned to force yourself on him. Yi Yuxuan might be very traditional. If you treat him like this, he can only marry you. After all, his innocence has been tarnished by you. Wei Wei Bai, the system was right, but why did it sound like she was like a scumbag, a beast, and a rapist? Wei Wei Bai seriously thought about it. In the plains she passed through those days, it seemed that she was indeed a scumbag. Then she looked deeply at Yi Yuxuan. If this man was too traditional, what would she do in the future? A good man and a scumbag woman would not have a good ending. If she accidentally became a scumbag in the future, what would she do if Yi Yuxuan hanged himself? Wei Wei Bai said to the system, why don't we go through a few more planes and get more life points? Then I'll let Yi Yuxuan go. An honest person couldn't afford to play. After all, he was the man who gave her life points, so she wouldn't hold him back. System, you never let him go. The system felt that it would have cataract sooner or later. It reminded, the feedback has begun, 150, Wei Wei Bai made a prompt decision. Activate the vegetative state gift pack, immediately, go through the plains immediately. Now that she shook off Yi Yuxuan's hand, she couldn't run even if she tried. This broken body couldn't withstand intense exercise. She could only transmigrate first. The system nodded. Wei Wei Bai took the opportunity to reveal a soft and sweet smile to Yi Yuxuan. I want you to pass on a message. Yi Yuxuan calmly and attentively stared at her, this kind of indifferent but serious expression. Wei Wei Bai actually saw a sense of anticipation. She looked into his eyes. Tell my father that I love him and that he doesn't have to worry about me. Activating newbie gift pack. Congratulations to the host for obtaining 3 days of vegetative state life. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she closed her eyes and the sound of steady breathing could be heard. Yi Yuxuan held her hand in a daze. She was still here, but why did he feel like he had lost her? You love him, there was a hint of disappointment in his tone. Even the light in his eyes dimmed. It was as if he had lost his support all of a sudden. Yi Yuxuan was silent for a while before she got up and pushed her forward. When he came around the corner, Qin Qiu and Bai Changyan were like 2 migrant workers, squatting in the corner smoking, and there was a big no smoking sign above their heads. Bai Changyan thought of his daughter, who had become a tomboy who would molest others, and he felt sad. This kind of psychological journey of his daughter growing up to become a female hooligan made him constantly reflect on his teaching methods. Qin Qiu also drooped his eyebrows and sighed. He was thinking about when Yi Yuxuan and Wei Wei Bai hooked up, there was no warning at all. Yi Yuxuan's face was cold, his eyes gloomy and dark as he glanced at Bai Changyan. His voice was flat. Father-in-law. The cigarette in Bai Changyan's hand shook. Who's your father-in-law, can you not call him that? TXT. Download T. Chapter 553. Yi Yuxuan raised his eyelids and looked at Bai Changyan from head to toe. That indifferent, and faintly mocking gaze swept past him just like that. Bai Changyan was only naive and sweet to his daughter, but he was usually very sensitive. Yi Yuxuan's expression, eyes, and attitude. Was this contempt, disdain, and looking down on him? His daughter hadn't married yet, but this son-in-law was already looking down on his father-in-law. Yi Yuxuan, this guy, simply looked like a bad guy who abused his wife and cheated on her. Bai Changyan was just about to say something. Yi Yuxuan lowered his head and glanced at the cigarette butts under their feet. His tone was very calm. Smoking is prohibited here. You're so old and still don't understand. Bai Changyan, Yi Yuxuan, Wei Wei asked me to say something to her father. Bai Changyan looked at his daughter who was asleep in the wheelchair and got excited. What do you want to say? Yi Yuxuan was silent for a moment, and that cold gaze appeared again. Are you Wei Wei's father? Bai Changyan looked sluggish. Isn't this nonsense? If he wasn't Wei Wei's father, then could he be her mother? Yi Yuxuan's voice was indifferent and sharp. I don't think you and Wei Wei have any similarities. She's such a lovely and beautiful girl, she shouldn't have such an ugly and old father like you. Bai Changyan, Yi Yuxuan turned his head and looked at Qin Qiu coldly. Uncle Qin, help him do a paternity test. Qin Qiu almost choked himself to death with a puff of smoke. Fuck, what's wrong with this? You want to rob someone else's daughter and deny that he's their father. Yi Yuxuan pushed Wei Wei Bai away slowly, his eyes terrifyingly cold. Tell her father that she loves him. Her father isn't necessarily Bai Changyan. Yi Yuxuan was completely unaware that her dark and petty behavior was simply engraved with the word jealousy. He just didn't like the way she said that she loved others. Bai Changyan and Qin Qiu, who were still squatting in the corner, looked at each other for a while. Bai Changyan finally exploded. He grabbed Qin Qiu's neck and roared. What is this little brat doing? What do you mean I'm old and ugly? Am I very old and ugly? I'm clearly a carbon copy of my daughter. Qin Qiu was pinched until his eyes turned white. Who did he provoke? Why did she have to pinch him? More importantly, you have to be made from the same mold as your daughter. Are you trying to scare me to death? When Wei Wei Bai woke up this time, her head hurt more than ever before, and she felt nauseous. Her chest felt tight, and she could smell cheap perfume every time she breathed. This perfume was so strong that it could make one faint. It was a mosquito-repellent incense that could drive away mosquitoes. She heard someone shouting and singing noisily, and someone beside her was pushing her. Hey, beauty, why don't you play? Wei Wei Bai reluctantly opened her eyes, and an ugly round face appeared. Her eyes, which were accustomed to beauty, widened in fright. Almost without thinking, she lifted her 10-centimeter high heels and kicked out. That pancake face cried out and fell down. She covered her head and saw that she was in a KTV box. There were 5 men and 4 women in her box. At first glance, the men didn't look like decent goods, and the women, wearing cheap low-cut sequin dresses and heavy makeup, they all looked the same. At first glance, they were all KTV girls. When the men saw that their brother was kicked, they immediately threw down the microphone. Bitch, why are you pretending to be virtuous and virtuous? Bai Wei Wei had developed a reflexive avoidance instinct in the face of danger. She almost didn't think much, turned around and ran out. /crossover system, Adonis, come over here. Chapter 554. The men behind her rushed over. Don't run, stinky woman. Wei Wei Bai had not received the memory yet, and the system seemed to have delayed its descent, silent. She could only rely on her own 2 legs to quickly run out of the room. Outside the private room, there was a bar and a dance hall. A group of people were dancing wildly. The deafening sound of the DJ hitting the disc could be heard. Wei Wei Bai was already drunk, and this scene made her head hurt even more. Wei Wei Bai. Amidst the rumbling music, a voice as clear as a spring rang in her ears. Wei Wei Bai trembled, frowning as she turned around. But she saw a slender figure almost touching her from behind. It was a young man, wearing a black coat with a loose hood on his head. He was wearing a black mask, and the mask was close to his face, but his perfect facial features could be seen. He looked at Wei Wei Bai coldly. His cold and sharp eyes were so clear that it was like someone had crushed a handful of stars and scattered them into them. Wei Wei Bai looked at him suspiciously and vigilantly. The man's eyes flashed with anger, and he looked at her with disgust. "Come with me for a moment." After saying that, he turned around and left. He looked like he was eager to cut ties with her. This mission is to obtain Hinanxi's love. Target: Hinanxi. Completion: 0. Time: 6 months. Ding, the male lead's favorability is -20. It was only -20. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, "So you were so hungry that you disconnected?" The system was silent for a moment. "No, I ate too much. The spicy strips given by the main system were too full, I couldn't walk." Wei Wei Bai said, "Then you don't need to eat in this world." The system said, "I just digested it, so I'm hungry again." The system's shamelessness was getting closer and closer to her. When the memory was transferred, she was already dizzy. This time, the pain intensified. She twisted her high heels and staggered forward a few steps, directly bumping into the man in front of her. She knocked her head against his hard back and felt a buzzing sound in her head. She couldn't help but grit her teeth and complain to the system, "This figure isn't bad. He's muscular and looks thin in clothes." The system couldn't respond in time. The man in front of her stopped in his tracks. He suddenly turned around, grabbed her clothes with one hand, and pushed her away calmly. Wei Wei Bai was pushed back a few steps by his strength and almost fell. However, the man glanced at her indifferently. A few strands of hair fell under his eyes. His deep and dense eyes were filled with coldness that couldn't be melted. "Don't touch me, it's dirty." Wei Wei Bai raised her head awkwardly. She had already received the memories, so she roughly knew how to face him. She pursed her lips and her eyes revealed a trace of cowardice. She said with some embarrassment, "Nanshi." The man's exquisite and perfect eyebrows furrowed tightly, bringing with them traces of ruthlessness and irritation. "Are you leaving or not? My brother is still waiting for you." After speaking, Hinanshi didn't care about Wei Wei Bai and strode forward. Wei Wei Bai looked at his tall and straight back and couldn't help but sigh, "This plane is worse than a beast." The system said earnestly, "The siblings have already survived. Sister-in-law and brother-in-law are actually not that hardcore." Hinanshi was the brother-in-law of her current body. The original owner was married to Hinanshi's older brother, Hidongling. In this marriage, it was inappropriate for the two of them to be of equal status. The original owner, Wei Wei Bai, was born in the countryside. She had a younger brother at home. Her parents were eccentric people who were good at calculating and preferred boys over girls. They squeezed Wei Wei Bai from a young age. When she was in junior high school, she dropped out to work to support her younger brother. /T. Chapter 555. She was pretty. After she turned 18, she started working in a bar and sent home all the money she earned. That was when Hidongling chased after her. He was young, rich, gentle, and humorous. He coaxed her until she was in a daze. Hidongling later proposed and Wei Wei Bai agreed. After all, she had lacked love since she was young. She would rush over to anyone who gave her some warmth. But what happened next was beyond Wei Wei Bai's expectations. The He family was a wealthy family. He married a bar girl who was not presentable. The two elders of the He family were furious. They used all kinds of methods to suppress Wei Wei Bai and tried to break up her marriage with He Dongling. All kinds of humiliation and framing made her feel at a loss and seek He Dongling's help. But what was even more ridiculous was that He Dongling didn't like Wei Wei Bai at all. He married her just to cover up his abnormal love. He liked his father's mistress, the woman he had to call his stepmother. And he married Wei Wei Bai to be a target. They had been married for so long, but he didn't even touch her. So he couldn't wait for more people to bully Wei Wei Bai. That way, he could cover up his dirty affair with his stepmother. Later, Wei Wei Bai was framed for stealing jewelry and was chased out of the He family. Under the He family suppression, she was poor and could only return to the bar to be a hostess. At this time, He Dongling still pretended to be in deep love and pain. He lied to everyone. He even got into a car accident on the way to have an affair with his stepmother and became a vegetable in bed. Everyone thought that He Dongling had sneaked out to find Wei Wei Bai. The He family hated Wei Wei Bai even more. After reading these memories, Wei Wei Bai only had one sentence. The original owner of the body, Wei Wei Bai, had fucked up the dog and abused the cat. Were the He family's lunatics the only ones who caught her and bit her? She didn't know if it was because the He family was evil or something. After suppressing Wei Wei Bai, the He family fell into a political crisis and went bankrupt. Now, the He family's two elders were fleeing abroad. Only He Dongling, who was in a vegetative state, was still waiting to die in the hospital. There was also He Dongling's younger brother, He Nanshi. When Wei Wei Bai saw this, she simply clapped her hands in joy. There was true love in the world, and there was true love in the world. These lunatics should be beggars on the streets. He Nanshi walked in front of a low-key, cheap car. After opening the door, he stood by the door and looked at Wei Wei Bai coldly. He hated noisy places very much. The noisy environment of the bar and the unrestrained behavior of the bar girls made his impression of his sister-in-law, Wei Wei Bai, plummet. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be drunk as she staggered. Her thin high heels tapped on the ground, and her two white and thin calves were even more eye-catching than the street lamps. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was heavy, and her perfume was pungent. But there was a clear light in her hazy eyes. Her large eyes were exceptionally beautiful. He Nanshi lowered his eyes, cold and emotionless. When he saw her walk in front of him, he said impatiently, "Get in the car." Wei Wei Bai got into the passenger seat. He walked to the other side and got into the driver's seat. The car smoothly drove out. Wei Wei Bai suddenly reacted. "Does Dongling want to see me?" He Dongling was a scumbag in black, so he hid it very well. The original Wei Wei Bai was also stupid and didn't know that her husband married her with ulterior motives. Wei Wei Bai was very good at maintaining this image. She immediately broke into a surprised smile. Her face with heavy makeup revealed an innocent and charming expression like a little girl. Then she hurriedly took out her small bag and took out her makeup remover. Dongling doesn't like too much makeup. I can't see him like this. He Nanshi didn't take off his mask as he looked at the traffic in front of him with gloomy eyes. // Chapter 556. He didn't care about Wei Wei Bai's excitement. He wasn't at home all year round, so he was very unfamiliar with Wei Wei Bai. He hated her a lot. It was one thing for a bar girl from the countryside to hook up with his brother. After marrying into his family, she even turned his family upside down. At that time, he received calls from his parents every day when he was outside, and every call was to scold Wei Wei Bai. Moreover, his brother didn't explain. So He Nanshi had a preconceived notion that this sister-in-law wasn't a good person. Not to mention, even if she left the He family, she could still do other jobs. She actually came to drink with him. His impression of her became even worse. Nanshi, look at me. Have I removed all my makeup? Wei Wei Bai couldn't seem to find a mirror. She held the makeup remover in her hand and was at a loss. Nanshi glanced sideways, his eyes cold. But he suddenly froze. After Wei Wei Bai's heavy makeup was removed, her clean and tender skin was revealed. Occasionally, the street lights shone in, revealing her delicate and innocent face. She was so beautiful that no one could nitpick. Even Nanshi, who had seen many beautiful women in the entertainment industry. He was stunned for a moment. Wei Wei Bai seemed a little confused. She bit her red lips and looked at him a little embarrassedly. Haven't you removed all your makeup? Her gaze was very clear, and her words were neither fast nor slow. They were gentle and had a hint of sweetness. Nanshi thought that she was the kind of woman who looked old. The result was so unexpected that he couldn't accept it for a moment. He looked away and continued to focus on driving. He didn't answer Wei Wei Bai. But that cold and disdainful gaze was a little less. When they arrived at the hospital, Wei Wei Bai was a little confused. Why is Dongling in the hospital? The original owner didn't know that Dongling had a car accident, nor did she know that the He family was bankrupt. Nanshi stopped in his tracks. He had his back to her and lowered his head, his entire person exuding a gloomy and violent aura. He got into a car accident while looking for you. This was the reason why he could not forgive Wei Wei Bai. If it wasn't for her, her brother wouldn't have become a vegetable. Wei Wei Bai, that scumbag Dong got retribution for whoring his second mother. What does it have to do with her? If it weren't for this plane, the target of her strategy would be too sensitive. She had already rolled up her sleeves and legated Dong's scum. Then, she hung up the He family's 2 elders and beat them to vent her anger. But if she did that, Nanshi would probably fight it out with her. Wei Wei Bai had no choice but to unwillingly reveal a sorrowful expression and exaggeratedly said, "What did you say?" Dongling became a vegetable because of me. Nanshi said, "He's in the ward in front." As soon as he finished speaking, Wei Wei Bai rushed over like a gust of wind and opened the door of the ward. Then, she saw the figure of a man lying on the bed. After confirming that it was Dongling, she gathered her chi in her dantian and stomped on the ground. Her entire body rushed over and landed heavily on his body. Although Dongling was in a vegetative state, he still reacted. He was pressed down by her until his expression twisted and his tongue stuck out. Wei Wei Bai immediately burst into tears. She pressed down on Dongling. "Dongling, what's wrong with you? Wake up." Vegetative Dongling. He felt like he was going to die. Nanshi, who had just entered the ward, took off his mask and saw Wei Wei Bai's incomparably sorrowful appearance. His heart couldn't help but relax. Although this woman's character was rotten, at least she still had some sincerity towards his brother. At least she wasn't completely rotten. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -15. Chapter 557. Wei Wei Bai couldn't crush Cinder to death. She only hated herself for being light and having a perfect figure. She didn't have any extra fat to punish this blind and slanted world's #1 scumbag. Behind her, Nanshi's clear and particularly recognizable voice suddenly came from behind her. There was a hint of impatience and indifference. "I've brought the divorce agreement. Hurry up and sign it." The purpose of looking for Wei Wei Bai today was to get the divorce agreement. This divorce agreement had been prepared long before Wei Wei Bai entered the He family. If Wei Wei Bai hadn't insisted on getting a divorce, this divorce agreement had taken effect long ago. Nanshi saw that Wei Wei Bai had stopped crying. Her back was facing him. Even if she was wearing a cheap dress, her slender and thin back didn't look ugly. He threw the agreement in his hand on the table. Sign it. The agreement will give you a property. Don't think it's too little. Now, all of the He family's assets have been frozen. This storm. The He family had become a rat crossing the street that everyone hated. He had always been in the entertainment industry. He didn't know that his family was already full of holes. In addition, this time, he recklessly interfered in the political circle. He basically couldn't make a comeback. Hinanshi was also banned. He originally thought that he had so many fans, a manager, and a company to protect him. In the end, when the matter came out, the company immediately abandoned him. His fans spurned him. His manager turned hostile. Overnight, he saw clearly that people were sinister. Without the He family, he was trash. No, without money and power, he was trash. Wei Wei Bai's body stiffened. Her fingers nervously grabbed He dongling. Her voice trembled with helplessness. I'm not getting a divorce. Hinanshi looked at her coldly. His cold eyes were like a firm and calm ice field, without a trace of emotion. My family has no money. My brother is now in a vegetative state. Do you think you can still be Mrs. He and enjoy all the glory and wealth? During this period of indifference, he clearly saw how disgusting the human heart was. Wei Wei Bai, a bar girl, had fallen to the point of being an escort. How could such a woman dream of grabbing his brother and soaring into the sky? Hinanshi's thin lips curled up coldly, as if he was mocking her. He wanted to shatter her dreams of riches and honor with every word. Do you know how much the hospital bill is for my brother to lie here every day? When the money in the account is gone, as his wife, you have to feed him even if you have to pick up garbage. There was still enough money for He dongling's medical expenses. However, he was deliberately scaring Wei Wei Bai so that she would back off. Wei Wei Bai's voice was soft but firm. I won't leave your brother. Hinanshi was already in a bad mood. When he didn't get the reaction he expected, his voice immediately turned cold. Are you still dreaming that my family can give you anything? Stop dreaming. The He family is bankrupt. If you buy any newspaper now, it will say that my family is bankrupt. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head, her back facing Hinanshi. She reached out and gently tucked He dongling in, her long hair falling over her shoulders. Hinanshi only saw a thin slit at the waist of her dress when she bent over. This kind of dress with a slit at the back was very scheming. It was as if she was trying to seduce someone. He glanced over indifferently and saw that her waist was revealing a bit of fair skin. It was delicate and cute. Hinanshi couldn't help but feel gloomy. His tone became heavier. Are you deaf? If you don't get a divorce, you'll have to help pay off the huge debt of the He family. How many years will it take you to pay back the dirty money from the escort? Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Transmigration system, Adonis, come here. Chapter 558. Wei Wei Bai adjusted the blanket for He dongling before turning around slowly. She saw Hinanshi standing by the table. He took off his mask and threw it on the table. He looked unusually young. He looked like a teenager with a pair of dark eyes that had a cold light in them. He had one hand in his trouser pocket. He looked delicate and thin, but his aura was gloomy and sharp. He gave people a feeling that he was not easy to get along with. When he saw Wei Wei Bai turn around, his gaze turned colder. He was as vigilant as a wolf cub. Wei Wei Bai did not say anything. Instead, she stared at him motionlessly. Her gaze was even more oppressive than his. Hinanshi frowned and stared back at her. As he stared, his gaze involuntarily landed on the tip of her nose, her moist eyes, and her trembling lips. Why was this woman so aggrieved? She had turned his family upside down and now she was acting pitiful. He had told her that his family was bankrupt. Did she not believe him? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before she finally walked in front of him. He Nanshi looked at her indifferently. However, she suddenly became tough. Call me sister-in-law. He Nanshi, Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips and stared at him fiercely. I'm your sister-in-law. Don't you know how to be polite? He Nanshi was annoyed. You don't want to give me face, slap. She suddenly raised her hand and slapped his face with her soft palm without hesitation. He Nanshi tilted his head. His mind was a little confused. This woman dared to hit him. He was never one to be taken advantage of, not to mention that he was in an unusually bad mood now. He raised his hand to return the slap without thinking. However, just as he raised his hand in the air, He Nanshi froze. Wei Wei Bai bit her lip hard. Her almond-shaped eyes were full of tears. Under the light, her teary eyes were shockingly bright. They were like a burning fire that could almost burn people. She emphasized each and every word. Her tone was filled with grievance, but she was incomparably strong. I am your sister-in-law, and your brother is my husband. I don't care if your family is rich or not, if your family is ruined or prosperous, whether your brother is healthy or disabled, I will not give up on him. He Nanshi's breathing stagnated. He could not look at her directly and could not help but look away. But at the same time, he felt like he had admitted defeat. Why was he suddenly being led by this woman? He Nanshi said stubbornly, Do you think I will believe a woman who works as an escort in a bar? After he finished speaking, he suddenly shut his mouth. Sure enough, she saw Wei Wei Bai's head drooping down like a withered flower. He Nanshi was upset and said coldly, Forget it, I'm too lazy to care about your trivial matters. You'll regret it if you don't divorce me. After saying that, he put on his mask and walked out. When he reached the door, he couldn't help but turn back. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai sitting by the bed. Her eyes were filled with sadness as she gently held her brother's hand. She turned her face to the side and lowered her eyes. Her fair neck was as beautiful as jade under the light. He Nanshi suddenly suspected that the woman who loved vanity in his parents' mouths. Was it really Wei Wei Bai? During this period of time, many people knew about his family situation, even his good friends. They all avoided him in fear. This made He Nanshi's heart turn cold. But why did Wei Wei Bai, who should have run faster than anyone else? But she insisted on staying. He Nanshi slowed down his footsteps and heard Wei Wei Bai whisper to He Dongling, wake up, didn't you say you wanted to go stargazing with me? He tilted his head in silence. His beautiful and gloomy eyes were half closed. No one knew what he was thinking. Then he lifted his feet and left. Ding, He Nanshi's favorability is at -10. // Chapter 559. Most of his dislike for Wei Wei Bai came from the evaluation of his family members. Once it was discovered that the evaluation did not match, the favorability would naturally increase. With her back facing the door, Wei Wei Bai continued to speak to the plant slag affectionately. That year when you were chasing me, you talked to me about the constellations. You told me that the stars in the sky were as beautiful as me. The system covered its ears. Stop, stop, stop. Stop being so awkward. Your cheesy words of love are making my soul fly out of my body. Wei Wei Bai, my son left. The system asked, your son. Wei Wei Bai, the eldest sister-in-law is like a mother. There are no elders in the family, and I'm the only one left. I'm the only one left. I'm the only one who's so beautiful that it's tempting to commit a crime. I'll treat Nan Nan as my own son. System, she's like a mother, like a mother, like a mother. She's so beautiful that she's tempting to commit crimes. Why does it feel like she's even more hardcore than a sibling love story? Where did the host's head come from? It was such a solemn and proper system that it had never inculcated such thoughts in her. Wei Wei Bai shook off He Dongling's hand and calmly wiped her hands on his blanket. I really want to give Cinder He some water and see if a vegetative person can photosynthesize and grow shoulder to shoulder with the stars in the sky. He had seen so many scumbags in so many planes. Only this scum in a vegetative state was different from the rest. She really wanted to kick his face a few times. The system said, "Isn't he still useful? He is the bridge between you and your son." Wei Wei Bai nodded. That's true. But what about my plane reward? Why is it that every time I don't remind you, you always want to take it all for yourself? The system was shocked and quickly ran to the trash can in the corner. He turned it over and over again. From a pile of junk, he finally found a reward that was barely usable. He hated himself for being so frugal when he was rich in the past. He couldn't bear to throw away things that were too good. As a result, he couldn't find anything expensive even if he went through the trash. Fortunately, Wei Wei Bai didn't know much. If she knew, the host of Another Time and Space would get a lot of rewards. Why didn't he stuff it into the trash can and kick it? Host, please accept the side reward. You will have a singing diva. You smile so sweetly. You are the best at singing. Wei Wei Bai, what do I need this for? Do you get a few extra coins for busking? System, it's been rummaging through the trash can, but it's still being despised. Wei Wei Bai, forget it, it's better than nothing. He Nanshi had a splitting headache. He didn't dare to surf the internet, check Weibo, or even use WeChat. It was full of negative comments about him. Things like him suppressing newcomers, acting like a big shot in the company, and bullying others because of his family's power and influence. Also, the songs that he composed were already popular overseas. Furthermore, he had been nominated for an international award and was about to reach another peak in his career. In the end, because the He family had been suppressed, everyone had unscrupulously taken advantage of his popularity and poured dirty water on him. As a result, his reputation was tarnished, and the foreign judges directly removed his song that was most likely to win an award. Now, scolding He Nanshi had become a political mission for the entertainment industry. Anyone who came to step on him could take advantage of his popularity. Whether it was true or not, no one cared. Suddenly, his phone rang. He Nanshi opened his eyes in a daze, his chest tight. He looked at the phone that kept ringing and hesitated for a moment before answering. It was his manager's voice. Don't blame me, Nanshi. Now, anyone who provokes your family will be suppressed. The people that the He family has provoked now are people that no one dares to provoke. He Nanshi's eyes turned cold. Did you call just to tell me this nonsense? Yes, no one dared to provoke him, so everyone came to step on him. His manager hesitated for a moment before finally saying, "Don't go out these days. Someone is spreading rumors about you taking drugs. You're finished." Chapter 560. He Nanshi stared at his phone in a daze until his manager hung up. Then, he connected to the internet and went to Weibo to take a look. He Nanshi has been taking drugs for at least a few years. Everyone in the company knows. He didn't take drugs. Who dares to say? If his family hadn't collapsed, he would have done whatever he wanted. Apart from his cold personality, he had never bullied others. He's so skinny because he took drugs. This rumor is true. The comments were accompanied by photos of him staying up too late and looking haggard. They were wantonly distorting and smearing his reputation. And it was all celebrities like him who were slandering him. Hinanshi knew that he couldn't clear his name. If the He family was at its peak, he wouldn't have been afraid at all. No dirty water could be thrown at him. But now, the He family had collapsed. Once the image of him taking drugs was established, no matter how talented he was, he couldn't climb up. Hinanshi got out of bed. With a pale face, he walked downstairs with a hostile aura. He poured himself a glass of water. His fingers kept trembling. He tried twice but couldn't drink it. Suddenly, he raised his hand and smashed the glass on the ground. Then, as if he had exploded, he smashed the entire living room with a cold face. When Weiwei opened the door with the key under the doormat, she saw Hinanshi standing in a pile of junk, full of violent aura. His thick eyelashes were slightly lowered, and his dark eyes were terrifyingly cold. Get lost. Weiwei stood at the door and hesitated. Then, she ignored Hinanshi's furious look and walked in with big and small bags. She walked past him lightly. She put the things in the kitchen. Then, she put on gloves, took out cleaning tools, and started to clean the living room silently. Hinanshi's fingers turned white from clenching. He looked coldly at Weiwei who was cleaning and suddenly snorted mockingly. Pretentious. Then, he turned around and went to take a shower. When he came back from the shower, he found that the living room was almost cleaned. Sounds came from the kitchen. Hinanshi was about to take out his keys and leave the house, even if his impression of Weiwei had changed. But he still didn't like her. When he reached the door, he stopped in his tracks. Thinking about how he would be found out when he went out, he was a scumbag drug addict that everyone wanted to beat. He would probably be drowned by the spittle of others. Hinanshi suppressed his anger and sat back down on the sofa to sulk alone. Suddenly, a pair of snow-white slender hands carefully placed a bowl of noodle soup in front of him. You didn't eat breakfast, right? I cooked you a bowl of noodles. Hinanshi had just finished showering and his hair was still wet. His black hair fell on his cheeks and set off his deep black eyes. There was a kind of coldness that kept people 1,000 miles away. Weiwei said softly, you eat some. Hinanshi impatiently lay on the sofa and looked up lazily. He said sarcastically, it tastes so bad. Only a pig would eat it. Weiwei was silent for a moment. She put down the noodles and turned to leave. Forget it if you don't want to eat. Then she continued to clean up the living room. There was still some unfinished work. She said calmly as she tidied up, I believe you. Hinanshi's eyelashes trembled and he didn't say anything. Weiwei threw the broken things into the cardboard box. Those people on the internet are slandering you. Don't be angry. It's not worth it. Hinanshi's sarcastic smile froze. He slowly turned cold. How do you know it's not true? Maybe I really do take drugs. Weiwei turned back. Her eyes were clear and her voice was soft. But it was filled with incomparable confidence. You won't. You value your fans more than anyone else. You won't ruin your voice. Taking drugs, drinking, and smoking could all ruin a singer's talent. Hinanshi's eyes were gloomy and filled with ruthlessness. Do you think I'll recognize you as my sister-in-law just because you say that? Weiwei was indifferent. Instead, she revealed a loving smile. Whether you recognize me or not, I'm still your sister-in-law. Hinanshi's eyebrows jumped and he snorted. Then he picked up the bowl as if nothing had happened and started to eat the noodles. The dense steam made his eyes a little wet. He had been attacked and slandered for so long. He had gone from a proud son of heaven to a rat that everyone wanted to beat. This bowl of noodles was the first time he had experienced kindness. Weiwei suddenly asked, is it good? Hinanshi's face darkened. It tastes terrible. Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 0. Slash. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click the button at the bottom to record this reading. Comma. Chapter 561. Hinanshi had a stomachache after he finished eating the noodles. Wei Wei Bai remained calm. The food she cooked was indeed disgusting. After all, for such a perfect person like her, having a small flaw would make her seem more adorable. Hinanshi collapsed and laid down on the sofa. He didn't have time to think about the black material for a while. His mood was not as bad as before. He turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai walking over with a glass of water. He did not know what he was thinking, but he immediately averted his gaze and looked extremely weak. Then, he saw a slender arm reach over, and a fair and delicate finger was placed on his forehead. Fortunately, it's not cold. It's not serious. Take some medicine. When the stomachache was serious, the forehead would be very cold. Hinanshi stared at her outstretched hand and could not help but look at her. He realized that she was wearing a simple t-shirt. The collar was a little loose, and her delicate neck and exquisite collarbone were exposed. Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked worried. What's wrong? Does it hurt a lot? Hinanshi fell silent. He suddenly turned his back to Wei Wei Bai. You can leave. I don't need your sympathy. After saying that, he actually became a little nervous. What was there to be nervous about? He really hated people pointing at him and looking at him sympathetically. After waiting for a while, there was an unusual silence behind him. She really left. Hinanshi showed a sneering smile, but his smile didn't have time to bloom. A pair of hands gripped his shoulders and turned him around. Hinanshi then saw Wei Wei Bai frowning. There was anger in her eyes as she held the pill and stuffed it directly into his mouth. Hinanshi almost choked to death. Wei Wei Bai's hands were nimble. She pinched his chin with one finger and poured a mouthful of water into his mouth with the other hand. Hinanshi did not have time to resist and was forced to drink the water and swallow the pill. He coughed. He was so angry that his hair was about to explode. What are you doing? Wei Wei Bai's face was full of anger. Why are you so insensible? Why are you throwing a tantrum when your stomach isn't feeling well? Only a child of a few years old would use self-harm to gain attention. Hinanshi's eyes were full of lush flames, and his thick eyelashes were trembling non-stop. Who are you calling a child? Wasn't this saying that he was childish? Wei Wei Bai frowned. Her fair skin was tinged with a hint of crimson. She lowered her eyes sadly. Nanshi, your brother is lying down. You are the only man in the house now, so take good care of yourself. Don't be willful. Hinanshi hated being lectured the most. In the past, to become a singer, his family had to lecture him regardless of whether he knew him or not. Now that he was down and out, someone was actually lecturing him. He reached out and pushed her away, looking at her with an icy expression. Who do you think you are? Do you really think you're my sister-in-law? Who are you to control me? Wei Wei Bai staggered and sat on the ground. She sat there in a daze, but she didn't jump up to confront him in anger. Her long black hair was a little messy and draped over her shoulders. Her fair skin had a clean and clear texture. Her eyes were a little scattered, and she looked at him with a hint of sadness and disappointment. Hinanshi was flustered by her gaze. He got up and wanted to pull her up, but when he stretched out his hand, he felt that it was too cowardly. He could only hide it and put his hand in his trouser pocket. Even his words were a little incoherent. My family doesn't acknowledge you at all. Why are you always shamelessly sticking to me? Isn't divorce good? The He family can't give you anything, and you still call yourself my sister-in-law. You're too self-righteous. T. Chapter 562. He actually wanted her to get out of the He family's mess. Who wouldn't avoid him when they saw him? Why was she rushing to her death? She was so down and out that she had to be a hostess. Did she think that she was a superwoman? Wei Wei Bai lowered her head in silence. She couldn't refute him. He Nanshi stood there, his tall and thin figure casting a shadow over her. Instead, she looked exceptionally pitiful and lonely. He frowned and didn't know why he felt uncomfortable. You can leave. Don't come back again. He had never liked this sister-in-law. She was just flattering herself. Bai Weiwei finally moved. She got up from the ground with some difficulty, then without saying a word, she picked up her bag. Then, she walked out with light footsteps. Halfway through, she turned back. He Nanshi stared at her back view. When he saw that she suddenly turned back, he turned back awkwardly. I'll leave first then. I know that you're in a bad mood and I'm afraid that you'll do something stupid. He Nanshi sneered. There was only coldness on his stunningly handsome face. Wei Wei Bai reached out and put the keys on the table. Then, she said softly, don't put it under the mattress next time. It's easy for people to find it. With that, she walked out and closed the door. The living room was empty. There was only the ticking sound of the clock that was so calm that it was cruel. He Nanshi's upright body slumped. He pursed his thin lips, his handsome eyes drooping. A feeling of loneliness surrounded him. He hated noise, but that didn't mean that he liked a place that was as quiet as a grave. He Nanshi turned to look at the door. He turned back awkwardly and couldn't help but mock, you really think that you're my sister-in-law? I don't care. Besides, she left just like that. It was just a plastic sister-in-law relationship. Outside the door. Wei Wei Bai squatted at the door, holding her forehead. Is the temperature high? The system was extremely calm. 38 degrees. Wei Wei Bai, why don't you make it 40 degrees? That would be more convincing. The system retorted, do you think you're a stock that can rise as you please? Wei Wei Bai, I've been out in the cold all night. I've even finished the outline. The system silently took out the earplugs and stuffed them into its ears. Meanwhile, Wei Wei Bai had already started to narrate, my sister-in-law, who has a beautiful face and a good figure, is kind, gentle, and saintly, worried about her poor brother-in-law day and night and couldn't sleep or eat well. She ran over early in the morning to take care of her miserable brother-in-law. In the end, it was too tiring for her and she got a fever in his arms. Under the blazing fire, the two of them, no, not even earplugs could stop the host's shameless words. If this had happened in ancient times, this shameless host would have been stuffed 100 times. When it compared itself to its host every day, it felt that it was especially righteous and awe-inspiring. It could even win the Best Moral Model of the Year award. What else could it do with such a host? The earplugs were also in despair. Wei Wei Bai, too bad he Nanshi, that idiot, chased me out, so I had to change my plan. I was so tired that I ended up in front of his house. The system couldn't help but say, isn't this a fucking scam? No matter what, she was still clinging on to Hinanshi. Wei Wei Bai smiled sweetly. Yeah. The system, half an hour after Wei Wei Bai left, Hinanshi was pacing around the house. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't in the mood to compose or play the piano. He was afraid to watch the news about his house when he watched TV. He didn't like to play games either. Crossover system, Adonis, come here and read the at https://www.sashu.com/crossover system, Adonis, come here and read at https://www. Sashu. com//crossover system, Adonis, come here and read at https://www. Sashu. crossover system, Adonis, come here and read at https://m. Sashu. com//crossover system, Adonis, come here, comma. Chapter 563. He had never felt that staying at home alone was such a sad thing. Hinanshi thought of Weiwei Bai again, that sorrowful figure leaving. She was a completely different person from those comments. At least she didn't abandon his brother and was still willing to visit him, no matter what her attitude was. She was much better than those so-called good friends who slandered him. Hinanshi didn't expect that he would be so down and out one day. He didn't expect that after he was down and out, the person who came to visit him was actually Weiwei Bai, whom he had always hated. He shook his head and threw Weiwei Bai out of his mind. Then he put on a black mask and opened the door in his slippers, planning to go out for a walk. However, when the door opened, a petite figure was curled up at the door. She leaned against the wall, her delicate eyebrows furrowed. Her delicate skin looked fragile and delicate under the light of the corridor lights. This kind of person didn't look old at all. If it wasn't for the heavy makeup, she would be less than 2 years older than him, but she spoke as if she was in her 70s or 80s. Hinanshi looked at her indifferently. His black eyes had a little light, but they were cold and empty. He lifted his foot and walked over, ignoring him. Hinanshi walked into the supermarket, found his favorite soda, and was about to pay the bill. He heard the two cashiers gossiping. Hinanshi takes drugs. I used to be his fan, but now I'm an anti-fan. I can't tolerate taking drugs. Yeah, although the songs are good, I don't want to see him when I think of him hitting people and having sex. This kind of artist with a bad record should be banned. The entertainment industry is full of people like him. Yeah, he should be banned. He listened to the discussion of his two former fans. Hinanshi held the soda. His tall and thin body was unbelievably tense. He almost couldn't control his trembling, whether it was anger or sadness. All kinds of feelings made him sour and bitter. He pinched the soda hard in his hand and suddenly shook it a few times. Then, he gloomily walked to the cashier and threw the money to them. One of them wanted to take the soda from his hand, intending to scan the QR code for change. In the end, Hinanshi forcefully pulled open the tab of the can, and the soda sprayed all over the two women's faces. The two girls screamed at once. Hinanshi threw away the soda can, turned around, and walked away. Walking out of the supermarket, he revealed a happy smile on his successful prank. However, halfway through his smile, he slowly became desolate. Hinanshi walked home again and arrived at the door. However, he found that Weiwei Bai was still lying there. He didn't want to care about her life or death. But this time, he couldn't step in. After hesitating for a few seconds, Hinanshi bent down and patted her face with a cold expression. Hey, woman, why are you sleeping in front of my house? She had already said that she wanted to leave, but she still refused to leave. Who knew what kind of dark schemes he was harboring in his heart? Hinanshi had been afraid of being slandered recently, so he looked at everyone as a bad person. Weiwei Bai's face was soft, bouncy, and surprisingly smooth. His fingers stiffened for a moment, and then he realized that something was wrong. Why was her face a little hot? Weiwei Bai opened her eyes in a daze, as if she had heard his question. She looked up at him blankly, looking pitiful. Hinanshi's fingers stiffened, and then he quickly retracted them, pretending that nothing had happened. Why are you still here? Weiwei Bai looked at him blankly, and then slowly lowered her head. Her voice was soft and pitiful. I don't know where to go. After saying this, she closed her eyes again, and her face was red. For the https://www.sashu.com/ for the full text, https://www.sashu.com for the full text, https://www.sashu.com for the full text, https://m. Sashu.com for the full text, comma. Chapter 564. She was confused because of the fever. Her mind was not clear at all. Did she think that he was his brother? She did not dare to move, worried that she would react. He was not dongling. Wei Bai's cries were soft, like feathers, brushing past his ears bit by bit. Finally, it came to his eardrums, and it made his whole body itch. She was crying like a kitten that had just been weaned. She muttered softly, "Why does everyone want to break us apart? I've worked so hard. Am I not worthy of being loved?" Hinanchi's body stiffened, not daring to say a word. She continued aggrievedly, "I just want to love you. I'm not dirty." Hinanchi's pupils constricted when he heard this. When they first met, he had called her dirty. Speaking of dirty, he was not that much better. Even if he was splashed with dirty water, in the eyes of outsiders, he had already become an unpardonable scumbag. Compared to Wei Bai, he was even dirtier. The sound of Wei Bai's breathing swept across his neck. This was his sensitive spot. His neck started to redden, and the redness spread to the back of his ears. Hinanchi did not know how long he maintained this position for, afraid that Wei Bai would realize that he was not her brother. Otherwise, the scene would be very awkward. When he finally could not hold on and his body was numb, he relaxed his body and gently pushed Wei Bai away. She was asleep with her eyes closed. She did not recognize him at all. Hinanchi's face was burning. Only then did he react, and anger surged in his heart. "Are you blind? I'm obviously younger and more handsome than my brother. How can you recognize the wrong person?" Just as he finished speaking, Wei Bai's eyelids moved, as if she was about to be woken up by him. Hinanchi suddenly got up and turned to escape. He was worried that Wei Bai would wake up again and recognize him randomly. Hinanchi walked to the balcony anxiously to feel the cold wind. He leaned against the balcony railing, and the cold wind messed up his short hair, revealing his smooth forehead. He did not know what to think, but he took out a box of cigarettes from his pocket. This was bought together with the soda at the supermarket. The soda was used to spray the gossipy woman. The cigarettes were still in his pocket. Hinanchi picked up a cigarette and stared at it. Because his favorite career was singing, and smoking would ruin his voice. Hinanchi hesitated again and again before stuffing the cigarette into his pocket. He couldn't help but shout, "What a coward!" He wouldn't have the chance to go on stage in the future, so what was there to be afraid of? Should he be more afraid now? Was it more important for him to make a cuckold out of his brother? Although it was an accident, Hinanchi was still brooding. After all, this was his sister-in-law. Hinanchi was stunned when he thought of this. After a long silence, he frowned and said impatiently, "Forget it. Sister-in-law is sister-in-law. After all, she's not a vain and shameless woman. It's okay to admit it." He did it on account of her sincerity towards his brother. That was why he reluctantly admitted her identity. But for some reason, he felt a little depressed. Hinanchi had been in a bad mood recently, so he did not think much about it. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased by 5. Wei Bai, this little bastard with a cheap mouth finally increased favorability. System, little bastard with a cheap mouth. Wei Wei Bai, don't you think this bitter-hearted boy who speaks sarcastically and bitterly has a poisonous mouth? System, bitter-hearted boy. Compared to the host, it felt that the male lead's mouth was like a clear stream, not poisonous at all. Chapter 565. Hinanshi was blown away by the cold wind for a long time before the unexpected kiss in his mind faded away. Then he went to sleep with a gloomy face. Wei Wei Bai slept on the sofa while he slept on the bed. He slept for a long time. When he woke up, it was already noon. With a bird's nest hairstyle, he walked out lazily with his long legs. However, he found that the sofa was already empty. There was only a note on the table. Hinanshi was silent for a long time before he walked over and picked up the note to read. There was delicate handwriting on it. I had a fever yesterday and caused you trouble. I'm going to take care of your brother. I have to work tonight. Don't worry about the medical fees. I'll earn your brother's medical fees. Nanshi, listen to my advice. Don't be afraid of temporary difficulties. You're very talented. One day, you'll return to the stage. This was a well-behaved tone. It sounded like a Qing dynasty zombie. Hinanshi crumpled the note into a ball and threw it into the bin. Do you know how much my brother's medical fees are? Poverty has limited your poor imagination. Where are you going to earn so much money? The He family went bankrupt. Assets were frozen. However, it didn't mean that they were so poor that they had to live on the streets. Some assets couldn't be put under the He family's name. Who didn't know that a cunning rabbit had 3 nests? The money under his name was enough for a lifetime if he didn't spend it recklessly. However, he couldn't be a glamorous young master in the future. And that woman, Wei Wei Bai, did she think that he was so poor that he was going to starve to death? Or did she think that the two of them would have to rely on her to earn money in the future? Hinanshi had never been looked down upon like this before. However, this kind of contempt wasn't malicious mockery like the outside world. It was a kind of unfamiliar and sincere concern. This made him lose confidence in his mockery. He didn't expect to fall to this point. It was his sister-in-law, whom everyone hated, who stayed to take care of them. Hinanshi suddenly wanted to call his parents, who ran away faster than anyone else. He wanted to ask, was his sister-in-law really that unbearable? She didn't look like a woman who stole jewelry and was vain. Was there a mistake somewhere? Hinanshi leaned against the sofa tiredly as he thought about it. He closed his eyes to rest. Suddenly, he frowned as if he had thought of something. Wait a minute. Wei Wei Bai was talking about work. Wasn't she just a bar hostess? He almost jumped up, his black eyes filled with anger. She's already married, but this woman still has the nerve to do this kind of dirty work. Who knows how many times my brother has been cuckolded by her. Hinanshi casually grabbed a black hooded sweatshirt and put it on. Then, he put on a black mask, put on a set of loose clothes, and ran out in slippers. His entire body seemed to be on fire as he rushed to the bar in an aggressive manner. This time, he was even angrier than before. Even Hinanshi didn't know how bright his eyes were. He was like a little leopard that was about to attack. Wei Wei Bai wore heavy makeup and sat in a corner drinking water. Tongzi, do you think that bear will come? The system said, I saw that he hasn't left yet. Wei Wei Bai said, he should come. After all, if I don't get rid of my hostess identity, it'll be hard for my favorability to increase in the future. The system opened its heaven's eye and scanned again. He's here. He's driving over. Wei Wei Bai suddenly came to life from her 70-80-year-old sluggish appearance. She immediately threw away her coat, revealing her revealing dress. Then, she walked to the table of other guests, picked up a glass of wine and gulped it down. She had always been a professional when it came to acting. Chapter 566. The bar was extremely noisy. Hinanshi walked in aggressively. In the heat wave, everyone twisted their bodies excitedly as if they were on drugs. A few of them were twisted into human braids. They were an eyesore no matter how he looked at them. Hinanshi put his hands in his pockets. His good-looking brows were furrowed deeply. He pursed his lips. His face under the black mask was as dark as a second mask. He turned his head to look around. He didn't know where Weiwei was. Could it be that she had been taken away? Some hostesses were hostesses, some were prostitutes, and some were kept as mistresses. Although he used to have a smooth life in the entertainment industry, no bad things could find him. However, he also knew some of the messy things that he should know. Weiwei was already married to his brother. Why didn't she know how to respect herself? No wonder his parents had always wanted to kick her out of the He family. Who would want a hostess as a wife? Hinanshi paced around. He really didn't know where to find Weiwei. He was also worried that she had really sold herself. He could only thicken his skin and wear a mask. He walked to those old women who looked like brothels to ask around. You mean Weiwei? Haha, her main job is to be a hostess. You have to open a private room to order wine before you can order her. Hinanshi's short hair was messy. His eyes were exquisite. He stood tall and thin in front of them. Even if they couldn't see his face. His silhouette was still stunning. He looked coldly at the old woman who was speaking. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said word by word, other than being a hostess. The old woman thought that he was here for some special service. She flipped through her book. Other than being a hostess, she doesn't have any other business at the moment. After all, some people don't sell themselves. Now that we're in a legal society, we can't force them, right? Hinanshi didn't know why, but a huge rock in his heart suddenly fell to the ground. She doesn't sell herself. No matter how much money you offer, you won't sell. The old woman laughed out loud. Little brother, if you're looking for a prostitute, just look for me. Weiwei isn't special. Her butt isn't big, and her legs are as thin as matchsticks. Only her breasts are moderately sized. It's not that no boss wants to buy her, but she said that she has someone in her heart and is determined not to sell. When the old woman said this, she said to another woman in the same business, "This is the first time I've seen a love-struck person in this place. He's a big boss, and he's offering a high price." Mama Mulberry immediately laughed like her. Hinanshi's frown deepened. These two old women in menopause, are they done laughing? What's wrong with having a sweetheart? Did she eat your rice or hit on your man? He turned around and left. He wanted to go to the private room to order some wine and get his sister-in-law to come back. The two old women behind him were still chattering away. Although that young man is wearing a mask, he looks handsome at first glance. Look at that butt of his as he walks. It's so swaying. It's so strong. Yes, in my experience, he's full of energy. Don't look at his thin figure, he's full of strength. He stained on the bed. Hinanshi twisted his feet and almost hit the wall. His ears turned red as if they were on fire. Then he walked faster. Suddenly, there were all kinds of excited screams and cheers in front of him. Someone on the high platform went up to take the microphone and was singing and dancing to liven up the atmosphere. Hinanshi wasn't interested at first, but that song, as soon as she opened her mouth, she sang in a low voice. Her voice and deliberately slowed down the words, that skillful and natural, seductive and pure feeling, just for a moment of the lyrics. Hinanshi's footsteps stopped. Chapter 567. He was in the music industry. If it weren't for the He family's incident, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he was the king of singers in the entertainment industry. Therefore, he was especially sensitive to good sounds. This voice was really good. Suddenly, the slow singing of the voice sped up. The lyrics became more and more rappy, faster and faster, but there wasn't a trace of ambiguity. The clear words and the explosive voice. The atmosphere of the venue was completely livened up. Tips were thrown onto the stage. Hinanshi couldn't help but look up. This glance caused him to be completely stupefied. He saw Wei Wei Bai standing on the stage with heavy makeup on. Her lips were red, her eyelashes were long, and her hair was spread out. She wasn't ugly. But she looked like a completely different person when she removed her makeup. She twisted her waist, and the small hole in the back of her dress faintly revealed her fair skin. Her long hair also looked like a blooming black flower when she turned and danced. She sang and danced, and her voice was steady, mellow, and beautiful. Every move of hers was hot and seductive. Hinanshi had never seen Wei Wei Bai like this before. Although the first time he saw her was at a bar, she wasn't this hot then. Later, after she removed her makeup, she took care of Hidongling with a clean face. She even specially ran over to encourage him. She was more like a soft-hearted, virtuous wife and loving mother. But now, she was a living vixen. Hinanshi's fingers were trembling. Didn't they say that they were just selling drinks? Why was she even on the stage now? Screams kept coming from all around. There were even drunk men shouting, "Take it off, take it off." Hinanshi felt like his head was about to explode. He looked fiercely at the stage, but he realized that Wei Wei Bai's gaze was faintly discernible, mixed with a hint of charm as it swept over him. She seemed to have seen him reveal a smile, and her lips opened and closed slowly. The song was deep and slow. It was as if she was confessing to someone. Hinanshi heard it. It was all her seductive singing. His heart trembled, and his muscles tensed up. His anger and another inexplicable flame intertwined. Hinanshi's temples kept throbbing. Her gaze lightly swept elsewhere, seducing other men to give her tips. $100 bill after another was thrown on the stage. Wei Wei Bai laughed happily and sang even more happily. Her dance moves were even more graceful and beautiful. A drunk man next to Hinanshi impatiently roared, "Tonight brother will buy you, let you twist for brother in bed." He immediately looked over and memorized the face of this wretched and stinky man. Then he walked over to the table, picked up a bottle, turned around, and walked a few steps forward until he was behind the man. He raised his hand and smashed the wine bottle on the vulgar man's head. This retaliatory action didn't take more than 10 seconds. Clean and efficient, without a trace of hesitation. The man screamed as blood flowed from his head. Hinanshi pushed the man away. Hinanshi didn't care about other people's lives and rushed to the stage in anger. Wei Wei Bai lifted her leg and did a more difficult dance move. Hinanshi just happened to be on the stage. He saw that under her raised leg, there were safety pants under her short skirt, and there was still a large part of her white leg. His footsteps were messed up, and he had difficulty breathing. He felt so uncomfortable that he wanted to tear off his mask. Wei Wei Bai. Hinanshi wore a mask and shouted in a muffled voice. Wei Wei Bai turned her head in confusion. She had red lips, a white face, and long eyelashes. Because of her sweat, her clothes were sticking to her body. That faintly discernible appearance was more impactful than being completely naked. To read the full article phone. Chapter 568. This was his sister-in-law. Hinanshi's sister-in-law had actually fallen to the level of coquettishness on stage. What was the point of singing so beautifully? What was the point of dancing so seductively? Was it for those lowly men to fantasize? Was it just for a few notes? Hinanshi stepped forward angrily and reached out to grab her arm. Wei Wei Bai finally reacted. She dropped the microphone in her hand and a trace of panic flashed across her eyes. Nanshi. Hinanshi's black eyes were filled with irritation. He gritted his teeth and said angrily, "When are you going to fucking stop being cheap? Don't you find it dirty and disgusting to do this work for a few dollars?" Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips. Her eyes were watery. She struggled to blink back her tears. She shook his hand forcefully, but found that he was holding on too tightly. "I'm still working. What are you doing? Let go." Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled, but her tone was firm. Hinanshi sneered, "Work? Do you love this work that much? Sweeping the streets and picking up trash is better than this. You have hands and feet. Do you only know how to sell your body to earn money?" Wei Wei Bai's face was pale under the bright lights. There was a kind of sadness that made her lose her soul. Hinanshi's heart was stabbed. He turned his head and said coldly, "If you don't leave with me today, don't expect me to acknowledge you as my sister-in-law in the future." He thought that if he said that, Wei Wei Bai would leave with him immediately. But in the next second, his fingers were forcefully pried away by her. Hinanshi's heart skipped a beat. He looked over in a panic. He found that Wei Wei Bai was looking at him calmly, but her fingers were clenched tightly. "Go back, Nanshi. This is not a place you should be. You're still young. God, you're still young." Hinanshi was so angry that he laughed. She could seduce other men with a smile on her face. When it was his turn, he spoke like a kindergarten auntie. Did he look childish? Hinanshi's eyes were burning. His beautiful eyes were so bright that it gave people goosebumps. He strode forward, bending his body, his hand going through her knee, his other hand holding her back. Without any hesitation, he lifted her up by her waist. Wei Wei Bai's entire body was locked in his embrace. Her face touched his chest and she gasped in pain. His muscles were really tough. Moreover, the lines are perfect, leading to a dress. He was tall and thin, and it was impossible to tell that he had such a good figure. She rubbed her face and said, "Nanshi, put me down. I haven't gotten off work yet. It's too late. You should go back first." Hinanshi was so infuriated by this woman that he wanted to vomit blood. "Shut up," Yi Sichin said coldly. If she wanted to abandon herself, then so be it. Why did he have to rush forward to save her? Anyway, if she wants to be a hostess, then let her be. Hinanshi carried her and was about to leave. There were still tips thrown at his feet. His eyes turned red. He was so angry that he turned red. Just for these few dollars, she almost took off her clothes. He kicked the money a few times and kicked it off the stage. It flew back to the ugly men's faces. The audience was in an uproar. They were having fun. Hinanshi smashed the venue, wasn't this slapping their faces? A few men immediately rushed up the stage. "Fuck you. Where did this idiot come from? Put her down." Hinanshi looked at them coldly. His entire person was as sharp as an unsheathed knife. His eyes were full of cold anger. He hugged Wei Wei Bai tightly and dodged a man's fist. Then he lifted his long leg and kicked the man's stomach, kicking him off the stage. This completely aroused the public's anger. Slash. Chapter 569. There were all kinds of people in the bar, and with the flashing lights, the drinks were mesmerizing. This combination stimulated a person's hostility. The people below the stage rolled up their sleeves and rushed up with red eyes, wanting to beat Hinanshi, the arrogant brat, to the ground. Hinanshi was already in a bad mood, and after being provoked by these people, he kicked them off the stage one by one. He had the aura of a man who could hold back 10,000 men. Wei Wei Bai said to the system, "These legs are too strong." The system flipped through the information and looked into the details. Yes, he has been practicing taekwondo for many years, and when he gets angry, he likes to kick sandbags with his feet. So when he kicks people, he kicks them like they are sandbags. By Wei Wei. In the future, if I accidentally expose myself, or abuse him to make him unhappy, will he kick me like a sandbag? The system said, "It's okay, beating is a sign of affection, and scolding is a sign of love. If you have a deep relationship, kick twice, kick once, and your affinity will increase." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. If I want to have a deep relationship with the system, can I kick it a few times? No matter how strong Hinanshi was, his legs would not be able to withstand the attacks of so many people. Someone threw a beer bottle at him, and from that direction, it would hit Wei Wei Bai. Hinanshi's pupils shrunk, and he dodged to the side awkwardly. However, he could not avoid another person's fist, and his face was hit to the side, and the taste of blood filled his mouth. Hinanshi was expressionless, and he bent his leg, kneeing the person who hit him in the stomach, and the person fell to the ground. However, the mask on his face had fallen off, revealing his youthful and handsome face. Some people found him familiar. He looked so much like Hinanshi. Who? The scumbag king of singers, the one who takes drugs, has one-night stands, and bullies people. He does look like him, but if it's really him, how could he still have the guts to come out? Hinanshi's expression was stiff and cold. He wanted to pretend to be indifferent. But his body was unable to move. Even Wei Wei Bai pushed him away and left his embrace. He didn't stop her. He couldn't suppress his thoughts and went back to the last time he went on stage. As soon as he opened his mouth to sing, the people below booed. He endured the humiliation and planned to finish the song. However, more and more people wanted him to get off the stage. A girl who used to be his die-hard fan ran up the stage with flowers. He thought that he still had supporters and was about to smile. The girl threw the flowers away and threw a rotten egg at his face. "Scumbag, how can you still have the face to sing on stage? Being a fan of yours is a stain on my life." That egg had completely smashed him into a daze. It also completely destroyed his self-confidence. And now, it seemed like the scene from that time had reappeared. The people below the stage cast disdainful glances at him one after another, informing him one after another. Hey, are you here to see the scum? Hinanshi. The one from the entertainment circle. I used to like his songs. Fuck, it's really him. I thought the news was smearing his reputation. Look at him, he looks like a scumbag. Those people's sarcastic ridicule was like a wave. Hinanshi pursed his lips tightly. He couldn't help but put his hands in his pockets and clenched them tightly. A trace of helplessness flashed through his vicious eyes. Although his back was straight, his muscles were still trembling. He was like a child who had done something wrong. In the face of everyone's criticism, he could only stand there blankly, not daring to resist. In the midst of others' ridicule, he wanted to escape, but he couldn't move his legs. Suddenly, a clear angry shout rang out. You are the scum. You have an ugly face, a poisonous heart, and a stupid brain. You walk on two legs and look like a human. You haven't learned the quality of a human. Address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com// Download of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 570. Hinanshi looked up abruptly, only to see Wei Wei Bai holding a microphone with one hand on her waist and one foot on the stereo. She looked just like a cute shrew. She lashed out at the audience. You think you're a judge just because you heard some news? What did my brother do to deserve your scolding? Did he commit murder or arson? He took drugs, someone bellowed. Wei Wei Bai immediately turned her head, her eyes terrifyingly cold. Who told you that he took drugs? Did the police or did you see it? No one could refute this. After all, they had seen some negative news on the internet and followed the crowd. They had seen that before. Wei Wei Bai pushed her long hair away from her chest. She was no longer as hot and seductive as before. She was like an old hen that only cared about her young, and she began to be aggressive. You think he took drugs just because you said so? You're better than the police, aren't you? You think you can bully others just because you say so? Have you bullied others to your doorstep? You're all as stupid as pigs. No, even pigs have higher IQ than you. You believe whatever others say. Do you think I don't know what kind of person my brother is? He's kind-hearted and can't even bear to step on an ant. How can such a child bully others? To put it bluntly, you're all jealous of the rich. When you saw his family fall, you rushed up to step on them. Wei Wei Bai held the microphone in her hand and shouted so loudly that everyone within a radius of dozens of meters could hear her clearly. An 18 or 19-year-old composing and singing in fear. For fans, he suffered gastric bleeding. He didn't buy a model or a yacht when he earned money. He used it to build Hope Primary School and donated it to a foundation for the disabled. He didn't create any scandals or persona. He was scolded by you cowards to the International Music Awards. He didn't even get to win glory for the country. Aren't you ashamed? Hinanshi turned to look at her in a daze. Under the lights, her face was sweaty and the cheap cosmetics were a little smudged. Her black eyeliner had faded and her lips were not as red as before. But her eyes were clear and bright. Her thin and weak body rushed to the front of the stage. She blocked him. She defended him. Hinanshi blinked strenuously. His eyes were a little sour. He didn't know what he was feeling, but he seemed to have been waiting for this moment for a long time. Every time someone scolded him, he hoped that someone would stand on his side and go against the world. She had to speak up for him. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 10. Wei Wei Bai scolded everyone, and the system couldn't help but remind her, there are a few people below who are on the verge of exploding. If you don't leave now, you'll be beaten to a pulp. Wei Wei Bai, who was enjoying herself with the microphone, froze. When he lowered his head, he saw that the faces of those bastards were not looking too good. She said very calmly, that's why it's important to be a kind person. Only then will the world be at peace. Thank you for listening. Let's meet again next time. After saying that, Wei Wei Bai threw away the wheat in her hand. She then turned around and ran to Hinanshi's side. Without hesitation, she held his hand and pulled him along while he was still in a daze. As expected, the people behind him were enraged. All kinds of wine bottles, chairs, and glasses were thrown at them. Wei Wei Bai grabbed Hinanshi and fled. She found a back door, opened it, and rushed out. It was the alley behind the bar. It was different from the front door of the bar. It was so quiet that only the lonely street lights accompanied them. Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief. Her face was covered in sweat and she looked a little tired. It's okay, Nanshi. Hinanshi heard her soft voice and spoke with a hint of laughter. // Chapter 571. He looked down at her silently and found that her eye makeup was all smudged. He couldn't help but reach out and grab a loose sleeve to wipe her eyes. Wei Wei Bai was stunned and a trace of confusion flashed past her eyes. He said softly, "Don't move." Her eyelashes fluttered and she obediently didn't move. Instead, she looked at him with a pair of almond eyes. He wiped away the powder on her face. He couldn't help but say, "Don't buy this kind of makeup in the future. It's not good for your skin." It didn't even have a waterproof function. It didn't look good either. The price was definitely cheap. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were a little misty. She seemed to be a little hesitant and her lips were pursed. In the end, it turned into a faint okay. She looked down at her and suddenly asked, "How do you know so much?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him in confusion. Under the dim yellow streetlights, there was a layer of hazy light on her skin. He pursed his thin lips slightly and his beautiful eyebrows knitted unnaturally. His black eyes stared at her face. "How do you know that I have gastric bleeding and that I do charity?" He didn't do any of these things. He also didn't buy advertisements to create a persona for himself. The only people who knew were his hardcore fans. Could it be that his brother said it? No, his brother was busy with the family business and didn't have time to care about him, so he wouldn't know. Wei Wei Bai was silent. She looked at him a little flustered and then lowered her head. Her face was a little red. She looked a little shy. She hesitated for a moment before she mumbled something in a low voice. The quiet alley and the estimated streetlights shrouded them. She was a little confused and asked, "What did you say?" Bai Weiwei raised her head and quickly swept a glance at him. Her eyes moved, and there was a kind of breathtaking beauty. "I'm your fan." She was stunned and looked at her in a daze. Under the light, her face was a little red from being rubbed by him. Her skin looked even more fragile and delicate. The tip of her nose was also red, like a glass doll. He repeated in a daze, "My fans." Does he still have fans? He saw with his own eyes that his fan club was disbanded. Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled slightly. "I like your songs very much, not because you're Dongling's younger brother, but because I simply like you." She simply liked him. This sentence was pure and straightforward, and it immediately hit the bottom of his heart. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 15. She blushed, but he reacted quickly. When Wei Wei Bai said that she liked him, she meant that she liked his songs. Not his people. She blushed even harder. His mind was in a mess. After all, his sister-in-law was his fan. He didn't even think about it. His mind spun with some effort. In the past, when he saw his own fans, what should he do to not feel awkward? She said after a long time, "Do you want me to give you an autograph?" When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she couldn't help but laugh. Halfway through, she was worried that he would feel awkward, so she could only suppress her smile. Her eyes were full of smiles as she said sweetly to him, "Okay." She's breathing was disorderly for a few beats. His eyes trembled a bit before leaving her smiling face. He didn't know what was wrong with him. His heart was beating very fast. She instinctively didn't want to think too deeply about it. Suddenly, his phone rang. She reached out to get his phone, but halfway through, he remembered that he had already turned off his phone at home. He looked up. He saw Wei Wei Bai take out a random smartphone and answer the call. The ringtone was "Sunny Day That Loves You." It was a song that he had composed, and it was also his favorite song. It had been a ringtone for many years. He didn't expect that Wei Wei Bai also liked to use this song as a ringtone. Chapter 572. The smile on her face faded bit by bit, and her tone softened. "Dad." This was Wei Wei Bai's father. Hinanshi didn't know much about Wei Wei Bai, especially her family. He didn't know what to feel, but he couldn't help but strain his ears to listen. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai turn around and take a few steps forward to distance herself from him. Hinanshi looked at her lonely figure. With her back to him, her slender shoulders were tense and trembling. He couldn't help but frown and take a few steps forward. Finally, he heard her soft and gentle voice. "Dad, you know my situation. I know that my brother just started university and needs money, but the He family situation, no, I mean next month. Next month, I can send home my salary from the bar. Can I keep some of it this time? Dongling is still lying in the hospital. I want to help. Nanshi is still young and needs living expenses, what the hell? Young? He was 19 years old and still young. Hinanshi's footsteps stiffened as he heard her careful conversation with her father. For a moment, his mind was noisy. He felt sad and touched. Even if this woman was stupid and didn't cherish herself, why did she come to drink with him when she couldn't do anything else? But at least, she didn't run away just because they were bankrupt. Wei Wei Bai was still trying to fight for living expenses. Dad, I really need money. I don't mean to ignore my brother. I'll support him. The phone in her hand was suddenly snatched away. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. She turned around and saw Hinanshi looking at her with a gloomy expression. He roughly knew her status in the family just by listening to a few words. Which daughter would be so humble in front of her father? Moreover, she had a useless brother who was already in university but still needed his sister to support him. Hinanshi's mind immediately outlined a strange family that favored boys over girls. He put the phone to his ear and heard a scolding voice coming from the other end. What do you mean? It's fine if you send back so little money every time, but you don't want to send it this time. In Hinanshi's dark eyes, a flame of anger ignited. What's so good about the He family? Didn't they go bankrupt? When they weren't bankrupt, their family didn't acknowledge you at all. Didn't your mother-in-law make all the companies reject your job and force you to be a bar hostess? Hinanshi's pupils shrank when he heard this. What did that mean? He suddenly looked over and found Wei Wei Bai standing beside him anxiously. Her face was red, and her eyes were red. She looked at him pleadingly with tears in her eyes. He seemed to want to reach out and snatch his phone back. Hinanshi reached out with one hand and easily grabbed her wrist. It restrained her from snatching the item. However, the cursing on the other end of the phone did not stop. What's the point of me giving birth to you and raising you? You can't even afford to raise your younger brother. Anyway, you're already a hostess and you're not innocent. What's the point of being a whore and having a chastity? You might as well be a complete whore. This sentence meant that he wanted her to sell her body. Hinanshi's mind was a little blank. When he came back to his senses, he could no longer suppress his irritation and anger. What did you say, old fart? The old fart on the other end of the phone was stunned. Who are you? Where's my daughter? Hinanshi was so angry that he laughed. He squeezed the words out from between his teeth. Yo, those who know clearly know that she's your daughter, but those who don't would think that you're forcing her into prostitution. What did you ask my sister-in-law to do just now? Be a whore. Chapter 573. You can search Transmigration System, Adonis, come over to search book, www.sashu.com, on Baidu to find the Be a bitch, these 3 words. It was like a burning brand. Every word rolled across the tip of his tongue. All of them were burning with intense pain. Hinanshi's eyes were red with anger. Wei Wei Bai is already married into our family. She's part of our family. Who are you to order her around? You're Weiwei's brother-in-law. Why are you interrupting when I'm lecturing my daughter? I'm still your elder. He retorted sarcastically. He directly raised the flag of the remnants of feudalism and vividly displayed the feudal ideology of the old society. Your daughter married into the He family. She has nothing to do with your family. She was born a member of the He family and will die a ghost of the He family. The old man said, You, He said, are you stuttering? Do you know the situation of the He family now? We owe tens of billions. As my sister-in-law, Weiwei Bai is at least 2.5 billion in debt. You insist that she's your daughter. Fine, the father will pay the daughter's debt. Tomorrow, I'll go to your house to collect more than 1 billion in debt. 2.5 billion. This unfilial daughter owes so much money. Don't call me in the future. With that said, the other party hung up. This was the first time He had seen such an outrageous father. It was an eye-opener. Weiwei Bai finally broke free from his hand and reached out to snatch her phone. She anxiously put the phone to her ear and hurriedly explained, Dad, don't be careful of what Nanshi says. He's a child who likes to spout nonsense. I'm hanging up. Weiwei Bai frantically tried to call him again. He reached out and snatched her phone away. He threw it on the floor and raised his foot to stomp on it. Crack! It broke. Weiwei Bai looked up. She was finally angry. He, why did you smash my phone? He put his hands in his pockets. His posture was a little slack. His face was dark. Why do you still acknowledge those vampires as your family? I've never seen such a father. A father who let his daughter be sold. He was worse than a beast. Weiwei Bai was so angry that she was trembling. Even if he isn't, he is still my father. He could not understand. What kind of family was this? This must be a vampire and a leech. Hating iron for not becoming steel, He heart was filled with a sense of powerlessness. He snorted. It's just a cell phone. I'll compensate you with 10. Weiwei Bai's eyes flashed with a trace of disappointment. It's not the phone's problem. It's my dad who will misunderstand me and kick me out of the house. He did not understand why anyone would want to return to that kind of family. He pursed his thin lips and looked at her coldly. Suddenly, he turned around and said through gritted teeth, Up to you. If you want to go back and be exploited and sold, that's your problem. Just consider me a busybody. When he turned his head, there was a hint of grievance in his eyes. Unbearable emotions were rolling in his heart. His good intentions were treated as ill intent. He had only taken a few steps when a corner of his clothes was grabbed and pulled. He suddenly stopped in his tracks. Her calm and gentle voice came from behind him. I have nowhere to go. He was a little confused. Nowhere to go. Bai Weiwei's flat, but suppressed, voice continued to sound. Nanshi, I'm different from you. Since you were young, everyone doted on you and loved you. Even if you're in dire straits now, you still have a home to return to. Although his brother was in a vegetative state. His parents had run away. However, this was all temporary. To He, the He family was not broken up yet. There was still a place he could return to. The save button. Chapter 574. Her voice was trembling. But I don't. Of course, I know that my parents don't treat me well. They like my younger brother more, but that's the only place I can go back to, Nanshi. He was flustered. He pursed his lips tightly, and his face was pale. Don't you still have the He family? She was already married to his brother, wasn't she? Wei Wei Bai fell silent. He Nanchi finally reacted. She was really touching his sore spot. Even if he didn't come back, he would still receive complaints from his parents every day. At that time, Wei Wei Bai was hated by everyone in the He family. How could she treat such a place as her home? Furthermore, my parents didn't let you work. He Nanchi's words were a little bitter, and even his tone sounded a little guilty. Wei Wei Bai lowered her eyes and clenched her fists tightly. Her figure looked slender and weak. She turned to look at the street lamp beside her. No, it's because my education is not good and my work ability is not good. That's why no one wants me. He Nanchi's voice was as cold as ice. It's impossible that you can't find a company in the entire city that wants you. Furthermore, Wei Wei Bai's appearance was so outstanding. Every company needed this kind of image at the front desk. Unless someone said hello, no one wanted her. This kind of business circle was very complicated. Furthermore, when the He family was still in business, they had the power to cover the entire city. With a call, Wei Wei Bai was blacklisted. Which company, big or small, dared to hire her? He Nanchi was so angry that his liver hurt when he thought of these dirty things. Wei Wei Bai just smiled. Her smile was indescribably helpless, as if she was already used to such treatment. Bun, soft bun, super soft bun. He Nanchi had never seen such a soft bun. She deserved to be bullied to death. Didn't she know how to resist? He Nanchi had a fiery temper, so when he saw Wei Wei Bai's gentle and weak personality, he felt extremely uncomfortable. He turned around and left, saying fiercely, "You're so easy to bully. You're such a big idiot. If you're being oppressed by your weird parents, you should just take it back." Even if he was hated by his parents, there was still his older brother. He could grab hold of his older brother's heart and then fight back. Would she become an evil daughter-in-law? He Nanchi thought of how much she had been bullied. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. The more he thought about it, the more he felt aggrieved for her. He turned around fiercely, his eyes as fierce as a wolf cub's. There was no sign of Wei Wei Bai behind him. He walked quickly and thought that she had been following him, so he did not look back. In the end, where was he? He Nanchi panicked in his heart. He immediately spread his feet and ran back the way he came. The streets in the middle of the night were extremely cold. A few drops of rain fell on his hair, and then more and more rain fell. He Nanchi couldn't care less about shielding himself from the rain. He pursed his lips tightly and ran around with his body dripping wet. Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai, where did you go? She couldn't have returned to that weird family of hers and been bullied by her parents, right? He Nanchi panicked and shouted, "Sister-in-law." Amidst the sound of rain, a weak reply was faintly discernible. He Nanchi's ears were sensitive and he immediately heard it. He turned around and saw a weak figure squatting in the corner in front of him. He rushed over and found Wei Wei Bai squatting in the corner. The rain fell on her body. She buried her head in her knees and shivered all over. He Nanchi's expression was tense. He gritted his teeth, took off his coat and put it on her. He also put the hood on her. Then he reached out and carried her in his arms. He ran forward in the rain. The person in his arms seemed to be frightened. Her body trembled. He Nanchi's heart twitched. It was painful and unbearable. He swallowed the sourness in his throat and said, "I went too far just now, but you really are easy to bully." Wei Wei Bai, He Nanchi's voice, clearer than the rain, sounded again. "So if anyone bullies you in the future, you can tell me. I'll help you bully them back." He hesitated for a moment before saying, "Who told you to be my sister-in-law?" Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 20. Chapter 575. Tongzi, why do I feel like an angel is singing? You're confused by the fever. Why am I having a fever again? What do you mean by again? Are you talking about the time you put the thermometer in the cup? At most, you're just having a fever. The above was Wei Bai's daily conversation with the system. She only remembered in a daze that she seemed to have messed around with Hinanshi at the bar last night. Then, they were drenched in the rain for a while before they managed to get a taxi home. Then, she had no recollection of it at all. Did Hinanshi do XXOO to the unconscious me? Stop. No, nothing at all. You took off your clean clothes yourself and put them on yourself. Then, you climbed into bed yourself. It has nothing to do with your brother-in-law at all. Don't try to frame him. Wei Bai rubbed her temples. Because of the fever, her heart was throbbing. She sighed. I thought that teenagers who have just passed puberty would be more impulsive. Last night, I acted like I was wet and seductive, but he didn't react at all. System, wet and seductive. Last night, the host had a fever and didn't know how frighteningly red her face was. Hinanshi was so scared that his face turned pale. He fed her medicine and ran to the clinic to give her an injection. Who would be in the mood to be impulsive after such a long time? Wei Bai's limbs were sore and weak. It was a feeling of weakness that was unique to sick people. She sat up with difficulty and was about to get off the bed when she realized that the door was open. Hinanshi walked in with a tray of food. When he saw Wei Bai's feet just touch the ground, he immediately frowned and his heart skipped a beat. He put the tray on the table and rushed in front of her. Your fever has just subsided. Have a good rest. After saying that, he bent over, held her feet and put them back on the bed. Then, he pulled the blanket over her. His series of actions were very smooth and nimble. Wei Bai had long realized that Hinanshi was a very efficient person. Everything he did could only be described as fast. Therefore, she did not notice that when Hinanshi grabbed her leg, his fingers stopped trembling for a moment on her ankle, as if he was feeling the delicate sensation of her skin. Hinanshi passed the porridge to her. Just eat some. I don't have an auntie now. I'll call and hire another one in the afternoon. Even if you don't like it, you should eat some. Wei Bai took the bowl and looked at him deeply. Hinanshi was a little embarrassed to look away. She couldn't help but smile, and her eyes curved up. She actually looked happy and cute. Thank you, Nancy. Hinanshi's face was tense as he humphed. After a long while, he said, We're on the same side. There's no need to thank me. This was an acknowledgement of her sister-in-law's position. After finishing the porridge, Wei Bai fell asleep again. She had to rest well to have the energy to attack. She was very open-minded and continued to rest. When Hinanshi came in after putting the bowl away, he saw Wei Bai sleeping. In the morning light, a layer of golden light shone on her fair face. Gentle and pretty. He suddenly thought of the night before, when she sang and danced confidently on the stage. Even if it had a vulgar and noisy feeling that was unique to that occasion. But her voice still penetrated his eardrums clearly. It brought a terrifying and stunning feeling. Hinanshi knew that his strength was in composing. Although his singing was good, it was still inferior to Wei Bai's impactful voice. She had such talent. She was actually buried in a bar. Thinking of her family background, Hinanshi directly faced the difference in starting points between people for the first time. //. Chapter 576. He was able to live a smooth life in the He family and become a little king of singers in the entertainment industry. She, on the other hand, was struggling to make ends meet. She had nothing. Hinanshi's heart softened. For the first time, he had a feeling of understanding towards someone. At the same time, another kind of inspiration suddenly surged into his mind. Ever since he was scolded off the stage, he had no inspiration to compose. Today was the first time he had the inspiration to write a song. Another connected room in his room had been transformed into his music room. Hinanshi walked in and sat down in front of the piano. He then began to compose a tune with the piano. Gentle melodies were written out one by him. Surprisingly, it was smooth. During this time, he came out and opened the door to let in the cleaning and cooking ants he hired. Then, he continued to compose. Wei Wei Bai woke up in a daze and asked, "Why do I hear an angel singing again?" The system said, "The male lead is composing a song." Wei Wei Bai strained his ears to listen. He vaguely heard a few gentle melodies from the music room. "It's quite nice. What song is it?" The system stretched its eyes and looked. It's a song based on you." Wei Wei Bai was excited. He slapped the bed and said, "The restlessness of adolescence. He even wrote a song for me. Will 100 favorability be far away?" The system said, "The name of the song is My Sister-in-Law Who Is Like a Loving Mother." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. The system said cheerfully, "Actually, the favorability of kinship can be farmed. Look, the brother-in-law and sister-in-law are like a loving mother and filial son. It's so great." Wei Wei Bai listened and felt that it made sense. "Do I have to put on the airs of an old mother and get along with Hinanshi, this good boy?" The system said, "Of course you can. The highest score for kinship is 90. If you work hard, you might reach 90 easily." Wei Wei Bai keenly sensed that something was wrong. "What does 90 mean?" The system said, "Even if the familial favorability meter is maxed out, it'll still be 90. However, you can use the remaining 10 favorability meters to farm for love." Wei Wei Bai's brain wasn't as useless as the system's. When the family was full, it meant that the spirit was full. Hinanshi really saw her as his family, and it was a familial bond that could not be changed. They were not blood-related, but they were spiritually blood-related. This kind of unchangeable familial and spiritual relationship. And in the end, it suddenly changed into love. That's more incestuous than incest. The last 10 points were simply a hellish level of difficulty. Wei Wei Bai felt like she had nothing to live for. Forget it. Let's just do the undeniably hot thing between my sister-in-law and brother-in-law in the middle of the night. Hee. Kinship is too difficult. The system said, "But he even wrote a song for you, my dear sister-in-law." Wei Wei Bai sat up abruptly. "Yes, this won't do. If this goes on, even if it's not familial, it will become familial. Would you have unspeakable feelings for your own family? Unless you were a pervert, it was impossible for normal people to have such feelings, okay?" Hinanshi, on the other hand, had come from so many planes, so he was the most normal target to be conquered. So if the impression of my dear sister-in-law was too deep, she could only look on helplessly as the 90 favorability points hung above her head, hanging there until the time was up. She could almost imagine that despairing scene. Wei Wei Bai said affectionately, "Nanshi, actually, I have unspeakable feelings for you." Hinanshi's expression changed. "I treat you like a mother, and you want to sleep with me." Wei Wei Bai. Mother. Hinanshi, a motherly sister-in-law. Wei Wei Bai could not help but tremble just thinking about that scene. "No, divorce, you must divorce. The. Chapter 577. System, didn't you keep the divorce agreement? You just need to sign it and we'll be divorced. That divorce agreement had Dongling signature. It would take effect immediately once it was signed. Wei Wei Bai held her chin and narrowed her eyes. a cold light flashing in them. How can it be so easy to divorce? He dongling, that vegetable waste, has to be reused. The system was confused, he's already in a vegetative state, how can we use him? He can't get hard. Wei Bai, this car is a bit sudden. She calmly coughed and continued, first brush up a wave of affectionate sister-in-law persona, then open up his brother's rotten affairs. That impact can directly remove the identity of sister-in-law in Hinanchi's heart. After all, the identity of the victim. It was much better than the identity of the sister-in-law. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 25. Wei Bai trembled, why did the favorability increase? The system was very calm, sister-in-law's song was written and he was happy, so it increased. These 5 favorability points were kinship points. She felt that 90 points of kinship points were waving at her. Wei Bai immediately surged with great strength. She struggled to get off the bed and changed her clothes, planning to go out. Hinanchi heard the movement and came out of the music room to see Wei Bai struggling to get out of the door. He looked at the time and found that it was just the right time for the bar to be open. Could it be that she still wanted to go to work? Thinking about those blood-sucking leeches of his family, a trace of anger flashed in his dark eyes. His slender legs took a step that was like Wei Bai's 3 steps. Just as she opened the door, his strong fingers pressed down hard and pressed the door back. Wei Bai was shocked. She looked up blankly and saw that it was Hinanchi, then she sighed in relief. Nanchi, I'm going out. Hinanchi frowned and snorted, you're not allowed to go to the bar. Wei Bai stared blankly for a moment before lowering her head. She said somewhat gloomily, I won't be going for the time being. After causing such a ruckus, the bar doesn't want me anymore. I reckon I won't be able to get next month's salary either. My father will nag again. Hinanchi couldn't bear to see her act like a soft bun. She really felt bad for her. His delicate face carried traces of arrogance and anger. You shouldn't have gone to that place in the first place. Also, don't send money to your family. Isn't that useless brother of yours already in university? How old are you? Wei Bai was pressured by his imposing manner to the point that she couldn't breathe. She said softly, 19. Hinanchi's eyes turned cold, and he sneered, you're the same age as me, and I've earned enough money to support myself for 18 lifetimes. Why does your good-for-nothing brother still have to rely on you to go to college? Wei Bai's lips tightened and her face turned pale. Her voice suddenly became louder, you're not the same. Hinanchi's words paused, thinking that she was going to say that her family was rich or something like that. But he heard her voice soften, you're not the same, you're a genius. These words were like candy that was suddenly stuffed into Hinanchi's mouth and into his heart. It was very sweet. Hinanchi's face turned red. To hide his shyness, he immediately straightened his neck and shamelessly admitted it, nonsense, of course I'm a genius. Ding, the male lead's affection has increased to 30. Wei Bai couldn't help knocking on the system, it can't be affection, right? The system sighed. This was the first time it had seen such an unconfident host. It said, I can only tell you that this little brother currently doesn't have any impure thoughts towards you. Transmigration system, male god, come here. 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 Transmigration system, male god, come here, comma. Chapter 578. Or perhaps it had happened, but the person himself didn't even realize it. Therefore, the current favorability rating was so pure that it didn't have any negative feelings. Wei Bai sighed. A beautiful sister-in-law is right in front of you. How can you not have any thoughts? That's too beastly. System, Hinanshi saw that Wei Wei Bai was in a daze and immediately said, "It's no use saying that I'm a genius. You can't go out. What's your condition now? You're so tired." Wei Wei Bai hesitated for a moment before saying, "But I want to see your brother." Hinanshi was a little confused. "See my brother?" Wei Wei Bai immediately looked up and there was a hint of light in her eyes. "Dongling is still in the hospital. I have to take care of him at least once a day. Even if there's a caretaker, he needs to be accompanied by a family member." Hinanshi then remembered that his brother was still lying in the hospital. His face darkened. "I'll go and see him. You should rest." Wei Wei Bai reached out and pried open his fingers that were pressing on the door. She looked up with a gentle gaze. "No, he's my husband. It's my duty to take care of him." Husband? Hinanshi's head was knocked by this word and his fingers went soft. He was at a loss for a moment. He didn't seem to be in a position to stop her from seeing he Dongling. Bai Weiwei smiled, opened the door, and walked out. Halfway through, her cuff was grabbed. She turned back. Hinanshi stretched out his slender fingers and clenched them so tightly that the tips of his fingers were a little white. He pursed his lips and stared at her with his beautiful eyes. "I'll go too." After saying that, he felt that this sentence sounded very cowardly and immediately said, "He's my brother too. It's my duty to take care of him." Bai Weiwei raised her eyes to look at him, and he felt a little unnatural. Then she revealed a soft and sweet smile. "Okay." In the hospital, Weiwei Bai lovingly wiped He Dongling's face and hands, looking as gentle as a loving mother. "Good boy, who are you calling?" Weiwei Bai said, "He Dongling." Weiwei Bai sighed. "I can't help it. If I don't smash him, I won't be able to show such an affectionate expression. No matter how bad my son is and how much I want to strangle him, I still think he's cute." "Cute?" Weiwei Bai looked at He Dongling with an even more benevolent expression. The system shuddered as goosebumps appeared all over its body. Hinanshi felt that he was unnecessary. He sat at the side and watched with a cold expression as Weiwei Bai wiped his brother with a gentle expression. What right did his parents have to dislike such a good sister-in-law? They did not despise the poor and loved the rich. They even went through thick and thin together. If it were him, he wouldn't even be able to wait for it. Hinanshi stopped this idea and continued to stay with a black face and a thick face. He should be happy that his brother had such a good wife, but he did not know why he was holding back his anger. Weiwei Bai gave a lot of instructions to the nurse and then said to Hinanshi, "Let's go to the doctor and find out more about your brother's condition." Hinanshi sighed in relief and nodded immediately. He did not know why he felt so suffocated in this room. The two of them went to the doctor, and the doctor nagged a lot. Hinanshi was distracted again. He could not help but look at Weiwei Bai. She listened attentively without a trace of impatience. Her side profile was gentle, her eyelashes were long, and her beautiful eyes had a few traces of moisture. Hinanshi looked at her and his gaze deepened. He suddenly stood up. Weiwei Bai looked at him in surprise. Hinanshi said with a cold expression, "I'm going to the toilet." With that said, he left. He was a little upset and did not know why. He walked to his brother's ward unknowingly. Before he entered, he heard a familiar woman's voice coming from the room. "Bastard, you became a vegetable just like that. Have you ever thought about my feelings? When you slept with me, you were so lively. Now, you're like a dead person." "Slept with me?" Hinanshi froze and then stretched his head out to look. In the end, he saw his father's little lover lowering her head and kissing his brother. Hinanshi felt as if a bolt of lightning had flashed over his head. "Nanshi." Weiwei Bai's voice came from behind. Hinanshi felt as if 10,000 bolts of lightning had flashed over his head. is at https://www.sashu.com/. Chapter 579. His face flushed red and his body was as stiff as a rock. He forced himself to say, "I'll let go now." Him pressing down like this was simply the action of a hooligan. Hinanshi let go of her hand awkwardly and then took a few steps back. His face was red and so were his ears. His legs were weak and he felt that the ground he was stepping on was not solid. It was as if it would collapse at any time. The sound of the high heels was also far away. Hinanshi knew that he should relax, but he didn't know why, but he felt even more nervous. Wei Bai frowned and asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Are you not feeling well? Your face is red." Hinanshi reached out and quickly rubbed his face. "Red? It's not red, right? The weather is a little hot, haha." Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. "It's good that you're fine. Your brother's ward is next door. Why did you drag me here?" After saying that, she was about to open the door and leave. But Hinanshi's extraordinary hearing was activated again. That familiar shameless footsteps actually sounded again. And this time, it wasn't limping. It actually walked over and just walked to the door of their room. If this door was opened, the B*TCH's mistress faced his weak and pitiful sister-in-law. It would be too much. This was an Azura field to the nth power. Hinanshi didn't even think about it. He stretched out his long legs and his body was as swift as a bird of prey. He suddenly appeared behind Wei Bai. He pressed his hands hard against the door. He pressed down on the door that Wei Bai had just opened. Wei Bai was shocked. She turned around and saw the tall and thin Hinanshi with both hands on top of her head. His body was like a prison, enveloping her below. Her face was a little pale. She finally couldn't suppress the doubts in her heart. "Nanshi." Hinanshi listened to the footsteps outside. He looked down helplessly at Wei Bai who was locked under his body. His mind was in a mess, as if it had been ravaged by the flames of war between aliens and Earthlings. How was he going to explain this? He really wanted to go online immediately and send a message asking for help. How am I going to explain that it's a misunderstanding when I'm pressing my sister-in-law down? Wait, what if he saw this kind of post on the internet? Shouldn't his first reaction be, "Sister-in-law, what are you waiting for? Go." The replies under the post were definitely unsightly. Wei Bai's expression turned serious. "Nanshi, what are you doing?" Hinanshi was dumbfounded. He also wanted to know what he was going to do. He saw that her expression was getting uglier and uglier, and the suspicion in her eyes was getting more and more obvious. Hinanshi didn't even have time to think before he said, "This is actually a misunderstanding." Wei Bai looked at him lovingly. "What misunderstanding?" Hinanshi's lips became clumsy, but his ears were still desperately trying to hear the footsteps outside. Was that slut's mistress crippled? Why were they still standing outside their door? Were they going to leave or not? He held it in for a long time, but his brain couldn't come up with a normal reason. He couldn't say that he wanted to play hide and seek with her, right? He felt that he was retarded before he even said that. Wei Bai suddenly reached out and gently slid her hand over his waist. Hinanshi's eyes widened. His waist was a sensitive spot, and his whole body trembled as if he had been electrocuted. He blinked his eyes, and his body was as hard as a rock. In the end, Wei Bai's fingers slipped into his trouser pocket and took out the black mask that he had casually stuffed in. Then she pursed her lips and said to him gently, "Lower your head, Nanshi." Hinanshi looked as if he was hypnotized and lowered his head in a daze. Wei Bai reached out and put the mask on him. "Did you see a fan who knows you?" Hinanchi's eyes immediately lit up. He lowered his head in a panic and said in a muffled voice, "Yes, no, it's not a fan. It's just a slut paparazzi." Wei Bai nodded in understanding. Then she looked at the door and said softly, "Has the paparazzi left?" Hinanchi listened to the sound of people's footsteps coming and going outside, but he didn't seem to hear the sound of high heels. She should have left. Hinanchi looked at Wei Bai's gentle face and said unnaturally, "No, reporters are very patient." Download the mobile article at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 580. Wei Bai frowned. "Is that so? Then let's wait a little longer." Hinanchi nodded quickly. Then, he continued to support her head with both hands. His body was almost on top of hers. He didn't dare to move in this position. And Wei Bai didn't seem to think too much. Instead, she looked at the door as if waiting for the paparazzi outside to leave. Hinanchi found a reason and his emotions calmed down. His rationality also started to return. The rest of the things that he had overlooked earlier slowly appeared in his vision. She was so petite, Hinanchi's gaze fell on her body. From this height, it was easy to see her hair tied up in a bun. A few strands of irregular short hair fell to the side of her neck. Her neck was as fair as a ball of delicate snow. Such a bright white that extended all the way down. The collar wasn't big, but it was slightly open. He could almost see the delicate shoulder bones that were faintly discernible under her clothes. Hinanchi held his breath and his eyes trembled again. There were many beautiful women in the entertainment industry, but most of them were made up. Although their facial features were beautiful, their skin was bumpy. Wei Bai, on the other hand, had the most beautiful skin he had ever seen. It was so beautiful that it seemed to be transparent, but also had a soft touch. It felt very nice to touch. When she came back to her senses, his fingers had already gently touched the skin on the back of her neck with his fingertips. It was so smooth and tender that it brought a faint electric current. Wei Bai turned around a little slowly. Her beautiful facial features, delicate eyebrows, and a hint of innocence directly crashed into his eyes just like that. "Have the reporters left?" Wei Bai didn't seem to notice his actions and asked softly. Hinanchi lowered his eyes. His voice was muffled and had an imperceptible tremor. "They left." Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good. Then let's go out." Hinanchi immediately retreated and no longer shrouded her. She opened the door and carefully looked outside. "There are no reporters, Nanchi." Of course, there were no reporters. It was all made up by him. Hinanchi followed Wei Bai into the ward. Dongling was still in a vegetative state. Wei Bai smiled amiably and walked over. She turned on the music and played some nursery rhymes for him. Dongling is actually very childish. He likes the nursery rhyme of "a flock of ducks in front of the door" the most. If you play more of it, he might wake up because he's happy. Wei Bai's face was full of love, almost blinding the eyes of others. Hinanchi absent-mindedly glanced at his cheating brother and then at his beautiful and gentle sister-in-law. Then, his eyes accidentally fell on the table, and his pupils shrank. What the hell are those red roses on the table? Did that bitch bring them here? He took a step forward, picked up the red roses, and threw them into the trash can. He heaved a sigh of relief after throwing it away. Hinanchi belatedly realized that he wasn't the one who cheated. Why was he so nervous? Hinanchi felt like he had held more than 10 concerts without rest in the few hours that he had been taking care of Dongling. When they went back, Wei Bai found that something was wrong with him. When they were going up the stairs, she suddenly walked up a few floors and turned around to look at Hinanchi. Hinanshi looked up and a hand touched his forehead softly. He was stunned and realized that Wei Wei Bai, who was standing a few floors above, was looking at him seriously. Her sweet and gentle breath accidentally brushed against his face. It was like the tip of a feather gently brushing against his heart. Wei Wei Bai frowned and muttered worriedly, "You don't have a fever. Why are you so pale?" Hinanshi could not bear her pure concern. He pursed his thin lips and lowered his thick eyelashes to cover the inexplicable emotions in his eyes. "I'm fine." Wei Wei Bai smiled. "It's good that you're fine." Hinanshi suddenly asked, "You have a good relationship with my brother, don't you?" Chapter 581. When Dongling got into a car accident, his family said that he had gone to look for Wei Wei Bai. So it was Wei Wei Bai's fault that he had become a vegetable. At that time, he also thought that was the case, so he blamed this woman for a period of time. But if his brother was really infatuated, then what was going on with his father's little lover today? If he remembered correctly, the direction of his brother's car accident was in. It should be the direction of his little lover's apartment. Hinanshi's eyes turned cold. Wei Wei Bai didn't seem to notice his complicated emotions. Instead, she smiled shyly. "Your brother is the best person I've ever met." With that, she turned and walked up the stairs. As she walked, she said cheerfully, "He's the first man to send me flowers, and he didn't mind that I wasn't born in a good family and was willing to marry me." Sending flowers and marrying her was considered a good man. Hinanshi felt that something was wrong. He suddenly asked, "Did my brother transfer some property in the city to you?" Wei Wei Bai stopped in her tracks and turned around in confusion. "What property?" Hinanshi immediately caught the main point. "Did he give you the key to his private vault?" Wei Wei Bai was even more confused. Hinanshi felt aggrieved. "Don't tell me that he didn't even give you the family heirloom emerald jewelry." These were all things that Dongling should give his wife. And they were the most basic things. If Dongling really liked Wei Wei Bai, then he wouldn't just give her these. He would also give her a lot of property. Wei Wei Bai smiled stiffly. Her fingers clutched the corner of her shirt helplessly. "Nanshi, Dongling didn't give me this, so you can't give it to me now." Hinanshi was anxious. "Who would give you this?" "That's not what I meant." Did she think that he was going to snatch her money? Hinanshi furrowed his brows fiercely. His eyes were filled with fire as he said, "My brother, if he doesn't give you anything, how is he treating you well?" He hadn't said that out loud yet. Wei Wei Bai softly said, "Love can't be measured by money. Although Dongling has never given me money, he is indeed very gentle to me." How much was gentleness worth? Who didn't know how to say a few sweet nothings? Hinanshi curled his lips coldly. "A good man is willing to spend money for you. Those who were unwilling to spend money were scumbags." Wei Wei Bai added, "Sometimes, when I was bullied, he would secretly comfort me. Just thinking about it warms my heart." Hinanshi felt a chill in his heart when he heard that. Fuck, his woman was being bullied. He immediately kicked the man until half of his body was paralyzed. What the hell was she secretly comforting him for? It was normal for a man to bully someone in front of them, fight back, and fight back. Those who couldn't do it were definitely the scumbags of scumbags. Wei Wei Bai's tone was light. "Although he has never given me money or accompanied me to buy things, and is often so busy that I can't see him, and likes to not return home at night, I know that he is busy. I am very considerate of him. He didn't give her money, he didn't give her anything. She couldn't see him, and he didn't return home at night. Was this her husband? This was practically a missing person." Hinanshi felt so suffocated that he was about to vomit blood. She was being bullied like this and she still felt good about it. Wei Wei Bai continued, so, Dongling became like this because of me. I will take care of him for the rest of my life. Even if I have to sell my blood, I will not let him have a bad life. They were already at the door. Hinanshi reached out to open the door and stared at her for a while. His expression was tense, as if he was about to explode and beat someone up at any time. // Chapter 582. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, she saw that the favorability had increased again. She was worried that it was affection. She yawned and opened the bathroom door, only to see Hinanshi nervously scrubbing underwear. Hinanshi and Wei Wei Bai looked at each other. Wei Wei Bai was the first to react. She was like a small animal, carefully retreating. She was worried that she would scare Hinanshi. You woke up so early, Nanshi. You can use the bathroom first. After Wei Wei Bai finished speaking, she gently closed the door. After closing the door, Wei Wei Bai's smile changed. The restlessness of adolescence. System, is the host's brain filled with yellow waste? How could she immediately understand what he meant by washing his underwear in the morning? Can't he pee in his pants? Wei Wei Bai was like a worm in the system. If he pees on the bed, he'll be washing the sheets. System, that makes sense. When Hinanshi saw that the door was closed, his body stiffened for a long time before he came back to his senses. He pursed his lips, took out the underwear that was half washed, and continued to wash it. As he washed, his ears turned red again. It was a burning red that couldn't be cooled down. Beast! He suddenly scolded himself. How could he have such thoughts? He was simply inhumane. After breakfast, Wei Wei Bai took out a stack of bar recruitment slips. Hinanshi saw it and immediately snatched it. What is this? There were all kinds of deceptive words on it, such as free food and lodging and easy job. Coupled with the naked girl who was clearly sticking to him. Hinanshi was so angry that his eyes turned red. I can't go back to the previous bar, so I plan to find a new job. Wei Wei Bai wasn't impatient at all. Instead, she patiently explained it to him. Hinanshi neatly threw the recruitment slips in his hands into the trash can. You're not allowed to go. Why would you go back to that kind of place? Wei Wei Bai was a little embarrassed. Then I'll find a job as a nanny or a cleaner. Hinanshi said firmly, that's even more unacceptable. These jobs will only lead to bullying. Wei Wei Bai smiled. Nanshi, if we can't do this or that, we won't be able to earn money. Hinanshi didn't think much about it and blurted out, I'll take care of you. After saying that, both of them were stunned. Hinanshi hurriedly tried to salvage what he had said. I mean, although the He family has frozen a lot of funds and is heavily in debt, that's for the company. We still have some private money. You're also a member of the He family, so you can get a share of the assets. They were all his and his brother's private property. He actually had a lot more than his brother because when he was a singer, he had earned a lot of copyright fees. This money wouldn't be under the He family's company name. When the company was in trouble, his money couldn't be frozen. Wei Wei Bai said softly, but this money is all yours and Dongling's. If Dongling wakes up in the future and sees that I spent all his money, what will happen if he can't make a comeback? Hinanshi, why do you have to be so considerate of that cheating brother? This kind of brother who would make others wear a green hat should take away his money and make him cry bitterly. He snorted coldly, his beautiful eyes full of calculation. It's okay. It's just a little living expenses. Aren't you married? This is common property. Wei Wei Bai looked at him hesitantly. But, Hinanshi was almost driven crazy by her gentle temperament. He slammed his hand on the table. No buts. As the daughter-in-law of the He family, is it appropriate for you to go out in public? You should just stay at home and enjoy life. Slash. His gaze was deep as he stared at her for a while before suddenly saying, "What's wrong with you?" Slash download. Chapter 584. Wei Wei Bai looked up and forced a smile. "No, I'll be back soon." He Nanchi's expression tensed up, and the light in his eyes turned even colder. This made Wei Wei Bai even more nervous. After a moment of silence, he Nanchi nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll wait for you to come back." Wei Wei Bai let out a sigh of relief, then hurriedly walked out. She even forgot to bring her phone. He Nanchi walked to the sofa and picked it up. The last call wasn't this that shameless little bitch, the mistress? When Wei Wei Bai walked into the coffee shop, the little lover was touching up her makeup. She wore a red low-cut dress, and her long wavy hair made her look extremely seductive. Wei Wei Bai asked, "What's this little lover's name again?" "System, Hu Lijing." Wei Wei Bai, Vixen. Hu Lijing suddenly heard someone calling her, and she raised her head proudly. She saw Wei Wei Bai standing in front of her, wearing a clean t-shirt and long pants. Her hair was tied into a high ponytail, and her face was fair and tender without any makeup. She was so young that she had a clear temperament. Hu Lijing thought for a while before she remembered that this was Wei Wei Bai, the soft bun. Wei Wei Bai didn't let her think too much. After all, the system notified her that Hinanshi was about to come online. She had to end this quickly, so she reached out and grabbed the hot coffee on the table. She splashed it all over Hu Lijing's face. The black coffee and the hot temperature made Hu Lijing jump up and scream. "What are you doing?" Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai didn't have time to listen to her nonsense. There wasn't enough time, so he had to save the time. He immediately rolled up his sleeves and slapped her face twice. Hu Lijing had never seen such a swift and decisive first wife. At least talk before hitting someone. Who would start a fight right away? The system said, "He's here. The male lead has entered the cafe." Wei Wei Bai's cold expression changed and she looked at her sadly. "I don't believe that you have an affair with Dongling." Hu Lijing, whose face was covered in blood, was dumbfounded. "Why did you fucking come up and beat me up just because you didn't believe me?" She was also angry. She immediately raised her hand and said angrily, "I don't care if you believe it or not. Your husband loves me. What can I do? When he bought me a car, jewelry, and a house, he called me little darling. If it weren't for me, would he have married you?" After saying that, he was about to slap him. In the end, he was caught by someone from behind. Hu Lijing was shocked. She turned around and saw a tall and thin man wearing a mask and loose casual clothes standing behind her. His eyes were frighteningly dark. Then he looked at Wei Wei Bai. She stood there in a daze, her eyes drooping, her expression blank and pained. It seemed like it would shatter at the slightest touch. Hinanshi didn't know why, but he also felt a sharp pain in his heart. He pursed his lips and didn't know how to comfort her. Hu Lijing narrowed her eyes. She felt that there was an ambiguous relationship between this adulterous couple. She laughed coldly. "What, your husband cheated on you and you found a man to cheat on him?" "Oh right, I heard from Dongling that he married you to hide me. That's why he didn't touch you at all. You might even be a virgin." Wei Wei Bai's body trembled. Her eyes were filled with tears, as if she wanted to refute. But her lips trembled and she couldn't say a word. Hu Lijing was angry after being slapped by her. Seeing Wei Wei Bai's cowardly look, she became angry. He immediately became spirited, and his mouth also became vicious. "Why do you think everyone bullies you?" "It's because Dongling connives. The full articles, the downloads, the to make it easier for you to read next time, you can click Save there. Chapter 585. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said loudly, "You're lying. I don't believe you. He's so gentle to me." Hu Lijing chuckled. "How much is gentleness worth, silly woman? A man who spends money on you is a good man. You think a few sweet words or gentleness? You're too cheap." Wei Wei Bai picked up the coffee on the table and splashed it on her face. Wei Wei Bai then covered her face with her hands. Tears fell from her eyes. "You! How could you do this?" Her words were filled with sorrow. A heart-wrenching sob escaped from his throat. His eyes were filled with despair. She looked up at Hinanshi and turned around awkwardly. Suddenly, she turned around and ran out. Hu Lijing didn't want to be splashed with coffee a second time. However, Hinanshi grabbed her hand tightly and she couldn't run away. Hinanshi took the opportunity to shake her off. His heart was filled with Wei Wei Bai, who had run out. He was worried that she would do something stupid. Hu Lijing shouted angrily, "Why did you run away after hitting someone?" Hinanshi only remembered when she reminded him. Yes, he hadn't hit her yet. He immediately turned around, raised his leg and kicked. He sent Hu Lijing flying with a kick and she crashed into the table. He then put his hands in his pockets and walked out like a violent man. No one dared to stop him. When he walked out, he saw Wei Wei Bai getting into a taxi. The taxi had already left. He immediately stopped another car. Chase after the car in front. The driver was very experienced. "I'm catching adulterers, brother." Hinanshi frowned. "You're the one who's catching adulterers." "That's my sister-in-law." The driver smiled ambiguously. "Sister-in-law, did you get it?" Hinanshi was irritated. He took out a stack of cash. "Are you going to chase after her?" Once the money was taken out, there was nothing that couldn't be chased. With a whoosh, the old driver drove the car out at full speed. For the sake of such a thick stack of $100 bills, he even ran a red light. When he finally caught up with her, he saw Wei Wei Bai get out of the car and stumble into the bar. Hinanshi was also in a hurry to get off the car. The old driver immediately said, "Bro, the fare." Hinanshi narrowed his cold eyes. He pulled out $50 from the thick stack of cash and threw it to him. "The fare." Then, he opened the door and left. The old driver took the $50 and was speechless. When Hinanshi barged into the bar, he was dazzled by the crowd and couldn't find him. His face was dark, and his eyes were sharp as he looked around anxiously. The matter that he had tried so hard to hide had still been discovered. How could his brother, that bastard, ruin his sister-in-law like this? Hinanshi finally pushed through the crowd and saw a familiar petite figure. She was sitting alone at the bar, drinking. The liquor was poured down one cup after another. When he saw Hinanshi, his heart broke. He immediately rushed over and saw that there were still some men who didn't know what was good for them and looked over. It was as if they were waiting for Wei Wei Bai to get drunk so that they could make a move on her. Wei Wei Bai was trying her best to drink. Halfway through, the wine glass was snatched away by someone. She looked up drunkenly and saw Hinanshi wearing a mask. His beautiful eyes were full of ice shards. "Let's go back," he said in a muffled voice. Wei Wei Bai drank the liquor. The strong liquor was so spicy that tears welled up in her eyes. Her face was also red, and there was a kind of beauty that made people fall for her. Hinanshi's throat tightened. He hurriedly lowered his eyes and reached out to grab her sleeve. "My brother is not a good person. My brother should be the one suffering. You didn't do anything wrong." Don't torture yourself. Slash. Chapter 586. He wanted to keep this a secret, afraid that she would get a divorce. He was even more afraid that she would be sad. Wei Wei Bai revealed an ugly smile. I'm fine. He was made uncomfortable by her appearance. How could she be fine? She still wanted to endure it alone at a time like this. He repeated again. Let's go home. Wei Wei Bai turned her face away, looking confused and sad. I don't have a home, Nanshi. Her family valued boys over girls and did not treat her as a person. Her husband and the He family had an affair and did not treat her as a person either. She really did not have a home. Nanshi thought of this and his heart was blocked. All the feelings were mixed together and could not escape or be resolved. Wei Wei Bai picked up the glass and wanted to drink again, but his palm pressed down on the glass, making her unable to pick it up. She was stunned and looked up. But she saw that Nanshi's eyes were clear and bright, with a desperate heat. Treat me as a family member. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly. Family. Nanshi held it in for a long time, and could only squeeze out this sentence. You can be my younger brother. I'll be filial to you, and my home is your home. Wei Wei Bai trembled and hugged the system. Tongzi, it's really becoming a family member. Even filial piety has come out. The system said, what a normal male lead. In the previous world, there would be a malevolent male lead at the slightest provocation and a psychopathic male lead. Suddenly, she saw such a cute and normal male lead. She was not used to it. Nanshi saw that her expression was downcast, as if she was not interested in what he said. He suppressed all the complicated thoughts in his heart and did not dare to say them. He did not dare to reveal any of those thoughts that blasphemed her. Wei Wei Bai shook her head, her voice was a little muffled. Thank you, Nanshi, but you're not my younger brother. After saying that, she collapsed onto the bar counter and passed out drunk. Nanshi stood stiffly, her words still echoing in his mind. He was not her younger brother. Was she planning to divorce him and disown him as well? Nanshi bent down and picked her up. They left the bar and hailed a cab. Along the way, he hugged her tightly, as if he was worried that someone would snatch her away. Wei Wei Bai lay quietly in his arms. Her soft body was like a cup of water in his hands. The tighter he held it, the more flustered his heart became. Nanshi carried her home. The house was dark and empty. The nanny had gone back long ago, leaving only the two of them here. He didn't think too much about it. He immediately carried her to her room and put her down. He took off his coat and mask and ran to get a towel to wipe Wei Wei Bai's face and hands. Just as he finished wiping, someone suddenly grabbed his hand. Nanshi's fingers froze. He looked over and found Wei Wei Bai staring at him blankly. You're awake. He paused because Wei Wei Bai's face was full of tears. The tears in her eyes fell drop by drop. She pursed her lips silently and cried in a very suppressed manner. It made one's heart ache when they heard it. Am I a bad person? She muttered to herself. Nanshi frowned and was about to refute. He heard her say faintly, it must be my fault. Otherwise, why would you never touch me? Never touch me. Nanshi remembered what that little B**tch said. His brother had never touched Wei Wei Bai. He thought it was just nonsense. He didn't expect it to be true. Nanshi's mind was in a daze. This was obviously a tragedy, but the emotions that surged in his heart were similar to joy. He clumsily said, "You're very good, really." Wei Wei Bai looked at him sideways. Her black eyes lit up. Suddenly, she smiled sweetly with a hint of charm. Slash. Chapter 587. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment. She felt that Hinanshi was much more haggard than her. If she had known, she wouldn't have saved on her makeup and put on 2 panda eyes for herself. Wei Wei Bai forced a smile. "Morning, Nanshi." Hinanshi looked up at her and immediately looked away. "Don't be sad. My brother is not a good person. Don't hurt yourself. Don't go to the bar to drink alone in the future. You have to protect yourself and don't let bad men take advantage of you." Wei Wei Bai's expression became sad. She pulled the corners of her lips and smiled. "I'm stupid. I thought that because someone was gentle to me, I thought it was love." Her eyes were confused. "I never doubted Dongling. I believed everything he said. Even if he didn't touch me after we got married, I found many reasons for him." Speaking of this, she couldn't help but turn around and touch her eyes. "But I never thought that I was just a shield for him. It turns out that I'm just a substitute." Speaking of this, the petite figure finally started to tremble. She was indescribably weak. Hinanshi opened his mouth. How was he going to comfort her? His heart ached, but he was afraid that he would say something that crossed the line. He was scared of himself now. His mind was not pure at all. He was afraid that he would not be able to control himself and do something that he would regret. Just like now when she was so weak. His first reaction was not to comfort her. Instead, he wanted to reach out and hug her. Then, his mind was full of sauce. Hinanshi racked his brains, but in the end, he still squeezed out polite words. "Don't be sad. Don't be angry and hurt your body." Wei Wei Bai suddenly turned around and revealed a teary smile. She pretended to be strong and said, "I'm fine. It's okay if he doesn't love me. I already knew that a woman like me would not be loved." This sentence was like a blunt knife, cutting Hinanshi until he hissed in pain. He opened his mouth to ask her to divorce him, but swallowed it back. Even if that scumbag brother of his didn't love her, would she still continue to like him? Wei Wei Bai's face was pale. Her lips trembled as she revealed a smile that was uglier than crying. "I will set him free and let him be with the person he loves." Hinanshi's eyelashes trembled. He looked up at Wei Wei Bai in a daze. Wei Wei Bai repeated firmly, "I want to divorce him." Hinanshi's heart skipped a beat, then dropped again. He couldn't tell if he was upset or happy, but the part of his mind that was clear was aware of it. If she divorced him, he would be able to pursue her. This thought made his nerves finally excited, and his dim eyes brightened. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. With the help of the plant dregs, Wei Wei Bai finally got rid of her identity as a vain hostess. She immediately took the divorce agreement and planned to go to the hospital to sign it in front of the plant scum. After all, he had to go all the way and wait until the signature. He could kick that scumbag he dongling away with one kick. Hinanshi accompanied her to the hospital worriedly. The whole time, he pursed his lips and his face was dark, but his eyes were shining. When they arrived at the hospital, Wei Wei Bai saw he dongling in a deep sleep. She realized that, she really couldn't let him off so easily. So Wei Wei Bai's breath sank into her dantian. Wind blew under her feet, and she looked devastated. She suddenly pounced over and pressed he dongling on top of him. He dongling's eyes widened. "I can't breathe, I can't breathe." Wei Wei Bai saw that she still couldn't press him to death, so she could only settle for the second best. She reached out and grabbed his shoulders, shaking him desperately. "Dongling, how can you treat me like this? If you don't love me, then don't treat me well. You treat me well and use me. You make me suffer." He dongling was shaken by the strong wind and felt that his hair was about to be flung out. Chapter 588. He Dongling felt like his internal organs were about to explode from being crushed by something. The sharp pain made him wake up immediately. When he woke up, he found that Wei Wei Bai and He Nanshi were both glaring at him. Their eyes were bright and cold, as if they had a deep hatred for him. He Dongling couldn't help but tremble, his pale and haggard face filled with confusion. Wei Wei, Nanshi, why are you here? He looked around dizzily. This is a hospital. He, who was in a vegetative state, finally regained his senses. Wei Wei Bai rehearsed her next performance in her mind. Should she throw the divorce agreement in his face and leave in tears later? Or should she complain about him being heartless before leaving? Without waiting for Wei Wei Bai to figure it out, the familiar reminder finally sounded again. A prodigal son turning over a new leaf is more precious than gold or silver, you do it. He once abused your heart, liver, lungs, intestines, but in exchange, he never returned. He once hated you, abandoned you, and beat you to death, but you never changed your infatuation, and love is hard to return. Ah, a prodigal son turning over a new leaf, you're the best. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless, even very calm. Please complete the side mission of the prodigal son turning over a new leaf, make He Dongling cry and fall in love with you, regret that he abused you. Only when the favorability is above 90 can the mission be considered complete. If the mission fails, both the host and the system will belly dance naked on a stage with 10,000 people for 3 hours. Do you accept the side mission? The countdown has passed, accept. Wei Wei Bai and the system's stoic face. After a moment of silence, Wei Wei Bai said, why didn't your heart, liver, lungs, intestines break when you fell, but the side mission reject button? This side mission punishment was getting weirder and weirder. It was simply not something a human could do. The system said, if my heart and liver break, I'll break and won't be able to find you. Wei Wei Bai was melancholy. Damn it, if I knew it was this bad, you should have just broken it, don't find me. Was this transmigration mission something a human could do? He had the heart to risk his life, receive the reward of starving to death, and also had to face the strange punishment. He had never seen a more worried and desolate host than her. The system suddenly started crying softly. You actually despised me. Wei Wei Bai's heart softened. It's just a cheap mouth. You're pretty good. The system stopped crying and waved its little whip as it roared, then why are you still in a daze? Why are you still chatting with me? Hurry up and finish your mission. If you don't want to belly dance naked, then get to work. Wei Wei Bai. Fuck your slag stem. He Nanshi was the first to react. He saw that Wei Wei Bai was staring blankly at He Dongling and did not put down her pen. He knew that her heart was wavering. After all, he was the man she had once loved, Fog. How could he give up so easily when he suddenly woke up? His dark eyes stared at He Dongling. Brother, wake up. He Dongling was a little slow to react. What happened to me? I remember I was driving, and then, Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly, you were in a car accident. He Dongling had been lying down for a long time. His mind was a little muddled and his body was a little thin. He turned to look at Wei Wei Bai, his gaze gentle and affectionate. It's Wei Wei. Was I in a car accident? I remember that you were chased out of the house and I was in a hurry to find you. Then the car overturned because I was in too much of a hurry. He Dongling had the handsomeness of a mature man. His pair of eyes had a gentle luster. When he looked at people, even if he was looking at a pig, the pig would think that he had fallen in love with him. Slash.